Chapter 220. Because he was going to attend a formal event, Ryudo still wore a three-piece business suit with a high collar made of satin fabric, which made him look more mature and decent. However, unlike the one he wore in the Star Python apartment, the suit this time was white, and there was a very conspicuous dark golden dragon embroidery from the back to the shoulder area. The white suit was adorned with black dragon embroidery. The contrast of white and black accentuated this young man's characteristics to the greatest extent, especially the gold-rimmed black dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws on his shoulder. It simply made people feel that unconventional, domineering demeanor with just a glance. The most exaggerated thing was that after getting out of the car, Long Do actually wore a pair of pure black sunglasses that he usually didn't wear. It made his originally very lethal and fierce face even more intimidating. "Please come in." After helping Ryudo open the door, the royal etiquette officer who came to greet him couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then a few drops of cold sweat fell from his forehead. Humph! Long Do, on the other hand, stepped out of the car. His pair of sunglasses covered his eyes as he scanned the reporters around the Kikyo gate. He then strode in arrogantly, without a care in the world. He slightly raised his head, straightened his back, stepped forward, and his hands moved rhythmically on both sides. The young man's walking posture was actually very standard, but for some reason, he always had a domineering and arrogant attitude that looked down on others. It was as if the magnificent Kikyo gate and the Kokyo in front of him were nothing in front of him. It had to be said that although Ryudo's attitude was arrogant, he was really handsome. His already handsome appearance, coupled with his level 4 charm, which was enough to become an international idol, and his unique clothing made him look like a dragon among men. It was as if a young godfather from a movie had come to reality. Because Ryudo's appearance and aura were too shocking, the surrounding reporters couldn't help but quickly raise their cameras and take 10 shots of Ryudo from all angles. Flashes flashed everywhere, and the sound of buttons clicking could be heard. For a moment, the entrance was particularly lively, and the expressions of the reporters gradually became excited. After all, it was rare for this all-powerful second-generation leader to appear in public, let alone in such a special place. However, when Ryudo sensed that a large group of people around him was taking pictures of him, he came to an area less than 10 meters away from the Bellflower Gate. He slowly raised his left hand and made an international friendly gesture to the reporters on his left. Convex before the reporters on the left could recover from their shock. He slowly raised his right hand and made the same international friendly gesture. Convex. Immediately after, the reporters on the right were stunned. He raised his hands together and made a friendly gesture towards the huge royal palace in front of him. Convex. At this moment, all the surrounding reporters were stunned. The royal etiquette officer was also stunned. Not far away, the security team members who were watching the gate were also stunned. Am I seeing things? The leader of the extreme, Dao, stood at the entrance of the Japanese royal palace and raised his middle finger to the surrounding reporters and the palace in front of him. Although most of the reporters were shocked by Long Do's actions, there were still a few brave reporters who took photos from various angles that would go down in history and posted them on the internet. XXXX the leader of the Rulon group, Ryudo Kiryu, was paying his sincere respects to the Kokyo. At the bottom of the photo, the reporter used his trembling hand to type in this sentence. However, perhaps because the reporter was shocked, this sentence was not so much an introduction, but more of a sarcastic remark. It was not difficult to imagine what kind of sensation this photo and the fact that Ryudo went to the princess's coming-of-age ceremony would cause if it was posted on the internet. After all, it was already shocking that an extreme Dao boss was invited by the royal family to attend the princess's coming-of-age ceremony, not to mention that he went to the palace and raised his middle finger. It was simply too arrogant. Although the royal power of Japan had declined, the Kokyo was still something that represented the face of the country. Unfortunately, the face of the country was now like being publicly slapped by the extreme Dao young master, and it was a slap in the face. After all, who would understand the face of a country if you told Ryudo about it. Anyway, they had already shed all pretense of cordiality. So why should I save face for you? The most important thing was that this time it was Kobayashi who strongly invited him to come, and for this invitation, she even used access Dao to threaten him. This kind of action made Ryudo very unhappy, so he had been prepared for the past few days. He was holding back his anger and was ready to make a scene inside. Kokyo, right? I'm here, don't regret it. However, just as he strode arrogantly into the imperial palace inside, what appeared in front of him was the royal palace square that was covered with gravel, grass, and trees. Standing in the palace square, one could see the walls of the palace and the famous scenic spot, Mitsubishi Bridge. Mitsubishi Bridge was a special passage that led to the palace. It was said that only high officials and nobles could pass through this bridge. At this time, around the bridge and in the nearby square, there were armed guards everywhere. Obviously, for the princess's coming-of-age ceremony, the royal family had done enough preparation. When Ryudo stepped on the Mitsubishi Bridge, the guards on the bridge couldn't help but look at him with suspicion and vigilance in their eyes. After all, this guy's clothes, appearance, and temperament were not the same as the group of people who came to participate in the ceremony. This time, the guests invited to the princess's coming-of-age ceremony were all rich and noble. Most of them were members of the Yatsuki group, so their gestures revealed a fake upper-class atmosphere. But Ryudo was different. This guy looked like he was here to make trouble. After feeling the guard's vigilant gaze, Ryudo reached out his hand and pointed at his temple and sneered. "What are you looking at? If you have the ability, then shoot me here. If you don't have the ability, then go back and drink milk." The guard who was ridiculed by Ryudo blushed, but he could only turn his head immediately and didn't dare to look at the extremely arrogant leader. Coward. Leaving such an appropriate adjective, Ryudo swaggered across the Mitsubishi Bridge and entered the palace area surrounded by the walls. The tall walls were filled with ancient trees, hundreds of thousands of trees from all over the country. The palace buildings were scattered among the trees, which looked very different from the palace imagined by ordinary people. The so-called palace here was just a house built with large stones. Looking at it, it was all green tiles and white walls. The chrysanthemum family pattern, symbolizing the Japanese royal family, could be seen everywhere. It was very coquettish. Such a complex of buildings was not lacking in elegance and simplicity, but it lacked a bit of vastness and grandeur. If someone told you that this was a desolate resort villa, no one would not believe it. Because of the preparation of the celebration, the interior of the palace was very lively. Everywhere you could see people walking in the direction of the main hall or chatting under the surrounding eaves and trees. Most of this group of people were well-dressed and elegant. At first glance, you could tell that they were serious guests, unlike Ryudo, who was dressed like a noisy upper-class hooligan who came to make trouble. The main hall of the palace was the center of the palace. The main activities of the royal family and diplomatic ceremonies were held in the pine pavilion of the main hall. Under the surprised, disgusted, and curious gaze of many people, Ryudo swaggered to the entrance of the main hall. But just as he was about to go in, a hand patted his butt. Although Ryudo was indeed very handsome and charming, there were not many people who dared to take advantage of him like this. Section Chief Teshima, it's not good to greet in public like this. However, although he was patted on the butt, Ryudo could only reveal a dumbfounded expression. He turned his head and said to the female section chief who was hiding in the corner. She looked cold, but secretly touched a man's butt. Of course, the one waiting for Ryudo here was naturally the section chief of the Search Division, 1st Division, Teshima in Hana. Today's Teshima in Hana was different from a time when she went to the Rulon Group headquarters to investigate. Because it was a formal occasion, she wore a valiant policewoman uniform and also put on light makeup. This kind of outfit made Hana look more beautiful, coupled with her dignified and cold appearance. Her incomparably flirtatious personality was even more tempting. No matter how you looked at it, she looked like an indecent policewoman who would appear in a small movie or a small manga. As a high-ranking member of the Metropolitan Police Department, Teshima and Hana was naturally qualified to participate in such a celebration. But after seeing Ryudo, she tilted her head and signaled the two to talk in detail. Then she walked to the side of the garden. What does this girl want to do? Is she trying to take advantage of me at this time? Looking at the figure of Hana walking to a secluded garden on the side of the main hall, Ryudo couldn't help but gulp. Due to the special nature of this operation, Long Do came alone. He didn't bring anyone with him this time. Although Rue Hui would also participate in this celebration, in order to not let people discover her special relationship with Ryudo, the two would not have any open communication in this celebration. As for Lu Li herself, she was with Ji Ji and Gao Yuan in a building not far away. They were ready to help Long Do deal with any trouble that might arise at any time, doing the logistics work. The other two leaders of the Black Hand Alliance, Kai Yang and Tessa, who were originally invited, directly rejected the request to attend this time and also advised Ryudo not to go. After all, the royal family was obviously up to no good. Why should he take the initiative to go there? Of course, Ryudo didn't understand Kai Yang and Tessa's thoughts, but young people had a rush. Even if it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he still wanted to go there. Not to mention that the other party had provoked him in the face. If he didn't fight back, wouldn't it be extreme? Therefore, Ryudo decided to take a trip to the Kokyo, but he didn't expect to meet such a dangerous woman before entering the main hall. Although Teshima and Hana's nominal identity was the section chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, don't forget that this woman was actually a general under IM, the head of the Chenmu Group Guard Department. In terms of identity, the cadres of the minister were second only to IM in the Chenmu group, which meant that Hana's status was actually extremely high. The most important thing was that this woman also liked Ryudo very much, the kind of like that she wanted to eat him up. Chapter 221. It didn't take long for Ryudo to follow Lin Hua to a garden not far from the main hall. The garden was currently in full bloom. All kinds of flowers were contending with each other in terms of their beauty. The fragrance of the flowers in the garden assailed everyone's nostrils, causing the fragrance to spread from 10 miles away. However, after Lin Hua came to the corner of the garden, she looked around, and then quietly motioned Ryudo to stand in the corner of the flower bed. What's going on? Is this girl planning to do something to me here? Just as Ryudo was thinking about the scene where the two almost did it in the living room last time, Lin Hua had suddenly reached out and pulled his body into the flower bed. Plop. Accompanied by a muffled sound, the bodies of a man and a woman fell into the 1-meter-tall shrub at the same time and formed a very ambiguous position of the man on top and the woman on the bottom. Hiss. Ryudo-kun, you are so handsome today. After falling into the flower bushes, the heroic and cold female section chief suddenly stuck out her rosy tongue and licked her lips that were smeared with lipstick. Then, she reached out and wrapped her arms around Long Do's neck, like a beautiful lady who was about to have an affair with her lover. Dong dong. When he saw Lin Hua's little tongue, Ryudo couldn't help but feel his heart beat faster. After all, he now had a preliminary understanding of the taste of women. In addition, the female section chief was still wearing an ascetic policewoman uniform. Her legs wrapped in gray stockings were wrapped around Ryudo's legs. Coupled with the encirclement of her arms, she pulled Ryudo closer to her delicate body. Their bodies were almost pressed against each other, and they were hidden in the sea of flowers that emitted an enchanting fragrance. The scene was extremely ambiguous. Suddenly, Ryudo could only smile bitterly. That. Lin Hua, it's not good for us to be like this here, right? What can I do? Who told you not to come to me during this time? Little, bad, egg. Lin Hua said in a coquettish tone, while her head was close to Ryudo's ear, and she gently blew beside his ear. It had to be said that Tokushima Hana was indeed top-notch when it came to seduction. At this moment, their bodies were stacked on top of each other. Ryudo could feel how bouncy her mature body was. Moreover, being blown by her ear like this, even an Iron Man would not be able to help but feel a little restless. If it was any other time, Ryudo wouldn't mind playing with this female section chief, even if it was to build a relationship with her in order to prepare for the fight with Ayam in the future. But now was not the time. Besides, this was the famous Kokyo, the nest of the royal family, and it was the critical moment when the princess's coming-of-age ceremony was about to take place. Ryudo, mafia boss, was fooling around with the head of the Metropolitan Police Department's investigation department in the garden of the Kokyo. If anyone were to find out, it would be the biggest mistake in the world. Even 100 bows from the Metropolitan Police Department wouldn't be enough as an apology. Of course, the most important thing was that the two were hiding in the flower bed. He didn't know if Colored Glaze, who was observing them from afar, would find out. If she did, it would be over. Since Ryudo decided to explore the tiger's den 6 days ago, he naturally discussed a lot of countermeasures with Colored Glaze and the others. One of them was the comprehensive surveillance of the Kokyo. In fact, from the Emperor's point of view, the location of the Kokyo was really awkward. After all, this damned place was in the center of Tokyo. Other than the green space and a few rundown houses in the middle of his house, there were tall buildings everywhere. Looking out from the Kokyo, the tall buildings were arranged in rows, and the glass walls were colorful. It was a sharp contrast to the so-called palace's cold color and stone walls. As mentioned before, the so-called palaces and other buildings here were very short. They didn't look like palaces, but more like some suburban holiday villas. Therefore, looking down from a high place, it was easy to overlook the Kokyo. In fact, this was one of the selling points of many buildings around the Kokyo. It could overlook the palace and the emperor's family from the top every day. It could be said to be the best place to see the monkey. In this case, Colored Glaze, Sensible, Gao Yuan, and the others rented some units on the top floors of the surrounding buildings. Then, they used high magnification cameras to film the Kokyo from all directions. They could almost see most of the scene inside. In order to prevent anything from happening to Ryudo, who was attending the ceremony alone, and also to prevent any possible tricks that Kawada might play, Colored Glaze and the others naturally kept an eye on the situation here. As for whether he would be able to see the dragon duel in the corner of the garden, even he wasn't sure. If Colored Glaze saw him being pulled into the bushes by this woman, the consequences would be unimaginable. Ryudo would probably consider pulling out a gun and shooting himself in the head. As if sensing Ryudo's predicament, Rinhana chuckled in his ear. Don't worry, this corner is a blind spot in the Kokyo. It can't be seen from the outside. Don't worry about your little girlfriend finding out. You seem to know a lot of things. After hearing Rinhana's words, Ryudo couldn't help but frown slightly. This meant that Rinhana knew that Ryudo had sent people outside to monitor this place. And the head of the search department smiled. Don't forget who I am. You're living with Colored Glaze Kenzaki, and you're also related to Yunyen Suki. You're so young, yet you've already learned how to have one foot in two boats. How greedy. Logically speaking, even if Tajima Rinhana was the head of the search department, she might not know about Ryudo's personal situation. But if she knew about her second identity as the head of the Tenma group, then it wasn't strange for this woman to know about these things. From the beginning, Ryudo didn't deliberately hide his relationship with Colored Glaze and Yunyen because it was useless to hide it. With Ayam's intelligence-gathering ability, it was impossible for her not to find out. However, Ryudo pretended not to know about Rinhana's second identity at this time. Instead, he smiled bitterly. I didn't expect that the head of the Metropolitan Police Department would like to investigate these kinds of gossip. It's really a waste of talent. No. How can you say that it's a waste of talent? As long as it's related to Ryudo-kun, I want to know about it. Having said that, Tajima Rinhana reached out and touched Ryudo's face. Then her fingers slid down his masculine cheeks, across his strong chest, abdomen, and then to his waist. Just when Rinhana's hand was about to touch a strange part, Ryudo finally couldn't help but hold her slender wrist, and his expression became a little awkward. Rinhana's fingers were soft and cold, and it was very comfortable to touch. If it was at ordinary times, Ryudo wouldn't mind being touched by her, but at this time, he didn't want to. Seeing Ryudo holding her wrist, Rinhana couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, what's wrong? Are you shy? Haven't you done it with your two little girlfriends? We are still high school students, and we follow the proper etiquette when we communicate." You are obviously two-timing, but you still have the nerve to say that you are proper. What a little rascal. After being poked by Rinhana, Ryudo didn't know how to answer for a while, so he could only remain silent. Let's talk about something serious. Seeing this handsome Extreme Do group leader being forced to retreat step by step, the smile on Rinhana's face became even wider. She put on some light makeup to make her face look even younger and more beautiful. She moved closer to Long Do's face so that the two of them stared at each other. It was almost as if their noses were going to touch. Today, Kanata-chan and Tenya definitely don't have good intentions when they invited you here. You should have noticed this, right? That's for sure. After all, I have some history with that girl, and it's normal for her to want to mess with me. It would be fine if we were outside, but here you are in a state of isolation and helplessness, which makes it easy for you to be at a disadvantage. So I think you need an ally, a reliable ally. In fact, from a practical point of view, Ryudo was not isolated and helpless, because his ally Kandai Reihue was also present in the main hall not far away. Of course, Ryudo wouldn't be so stupid as to tell Rinhana such a thing, so he smiled gently and said, "Rinhana sister, the ally you are referring to, could it be yourself?" Smart. Rinhana licked her lips, and at the same time, she took a deep breath of Ryudo's majestic manly scent, and an intoxicated expression appeared on her face. Ever since she saw Ryudo at the Rulon Group headquarters, Tokushima Rinhana had always been very fond of this handsome and domineering young man. She even used him as a side dish for her DIY every night. In Rinhana's bedroom, there were pictures of Ryudo everywhere, and there was even Ryudo's pillow on the bed. It could be said that she had been deeply poisoned by this extremely handsome guy, with LV for charm. In fact, from Rinhana's point of view, she shouldn't be so close to Ryudo. After all, whether it was her identity as the Metropolitan Police Department chief or the head of the Tenma Group, she had an absolutely hostile relationship with Ryudo. Ryudo would die at the hands of Ayam Sama sooner or later. This was something that Rinhana had already confirmed. However, if such a handsome guy who completely suited Rinhana's taste died just like that, in her opinion, it would be a bit of a pity. In other words, even if Ryudo had to die in the end, he had to be played with by Rinhana first before he could die. At the very least, he had to let her reach the pinnacle of 100 times. Therefore, getting Ryudo Kuin's young and charming body as soon as possible was Rinhana's current biggest goal in life. So she said to Ryudo in a serious tone, "Ryudo Kuin, come and be my lover. In this case, I will provide you with all my strength." Is this a deal? Ryudo had long been mentally prepared for Tokushima Rinhana's request. After all, what was this crazy woman thinking every time they met? It was really a question that an idiot could think of. It's a deal, because our relationship is limited to lovers. Unlike your two cute girlfriends, you don't have to be responsible for me, and I won't be responsible for you. Hoo-hoo, let's just ask for physical and mental pleasure. How about it? Looking at Ryudo's hesitant expression, Rinhana panted slightly and said in a tone that seemed to be unable to hold back. Chapter 222. There was no doubt that Tokushima Rinhana was an infatuated woman, and it was the type that was obviously infatuated with Ryudo. Even in addition to being an infatuated woman, Ryudo also knew that this woman had obvious comedic tendencies, especially when she was tickled. She would be particularly happy. In the original Red Album 2, No Survivors, it was clearly shown how Tokushima Rinhana was subdued by Tenmu Ayam. In fact, it was just a tickle. La la la. Oh. Ayam-sama. Ha ha ha. It's so ticklish. You're really a pervert, Inhana. Follow me in the future. Yes. Yes, at that time, the scene of Tokushima Rinhana being tickled by Ayam in the game caused a huge protest in the player community. The reason for the protest was very simple, because the characters in the game were not dubbed. In the case of no dubbing, the players could not hear the sound of Sister and Hana being tickled. How could they not protest? The players condemned the game production company for being immoral. They couldn't even afford to hire a dubbing actor. Such a great scene, without proper sound effects, was simply a waste of God's gift. Because Hana's popularity was too high and the scene in the game was too famous, there were even players who spontaneously created Sister and Hana's exclusive voice pack, specifically to match the scene with a suitable voice, so that the players would enjoy listening and watching. Of course, that was a matter in the game. In the real world, Tokushima and Hana naturally did not need dubbing. Her original voice was good enough. Especially when this woman with strange interests wanted Ryudo to be her lover. The devilish voice was simply devilish. If it was in the game, it would be at a level that would not pass the censorship. Dangerous. It's too dangerous. It can't go on like this. After feeling Tokushima and Hana's obviously happy state at this time, Ryudo couldn't help but secretly frown. In fact, if Hana could become Ryudo's ally, then her assistance would be very useful in many of the following events. After all, this woman was the ultimate mole. But it was conceivable that if Ryudo now agreed to be her lover, then Hana would probably not hesitate to go on a rampage on the spot and directly eat Ryudo's skin. Although Ryudo was not a traditional man who treated sex as his life, in his heart, his own people should at least be given to his girlfriend, wife, or future wife. How could he give it to this kind of woman? So even if they were just lovers who used each other, Longdo didn't want to make this woman happy. Although he might be very happy himself, he would be letting Lioli, Yun Yen, and Dunya down if he did that. But if he didn't agree to Hana's request now, then she wouldn't help in the next princess coming of age ceremony. This was still a very troublesome matter. If Hana could help in this incident, then Ryudo's chances of winning would definitely be much higher. He naturally hoped to reach an agreement with Hana. What should I do? Should I agree? Or should I say, wait, didn't she just want to be happy? Then wouldn't it be fine to make her happy? However, just when Ryudo was pressed into the flowers by Tokushima and Hana, and could be eaten up at any time, his mind suddenly remembered the scene he had seen before, which was the scene where Ayam and Hana tickled each other. If he wanted to make this female section chief happy, he didn't have to sacrifice himself for righteousness. He could use other means. When he thought of this, the corners of Long Do's mouth curled up into a smile. After that, he quickly moved Lin Hua's trembling body to the side with the moon in the ocean. Originally, Long Do was pinned to the ground, but with a flip, a grab, and a throw, he skillfully pinned the woman to the ground. After being pressed into the flower bed by Ryudo, the expression on Hana's face became even more pleasant. She giggled, and after laughing for a while, she smiled and said, "So that's how it is. Do you like this kind of thing?" Then slap. But before Hana finished speaking, a palm had already scratched the itchy flesh on her abdomen at lightning speed. The speed was so fast that it was impossible to guard against it. Of course, Ryudo pressed this woman down for no other reason than that it was convenient to tickle her in this position. That was all. Although she was already over 30 years old, Hana had always been very good at managing her body. Whether it was her waist or her arms, they were quite beautiful, and her skin was tight and elastic. With this scratch, Ryudo felt as if he was scratching a surprisingly soft and smooth jelly, and there was even an obvious rebound force. Puff. Ha 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 ha. After being scratched at the itchy flesh on her abdomen, the itch spread throughout her body along with excitement. Hana's body trembled violently, and at the same time, she let out a strange laugh. Dragon. Ryudo-kun? You. Swish. Before he finished speaking, he reached out and scratched again, but this time he scratched Hana's armpit, which was more likely to itch. Moreover, from the looks of it, he seemed to be using more force than before. With Ryudo's current hand strength, scratching a person's body was no joke. He could really achieve the effect of scratching with a prop. Hana suddenly opened her mouth wide. She wanted to laugh, but she couldn't, and her body trembled even more violently. Her slender legs twisted subconsciously, and the more itchy it was, the more joy burst out in her heart, making her feel both physically and mentally comfortable. Humph, 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 there's hope. Let's keep scratching. Seeing that this crazy woman was getting more excited the more he scratched, Ryudo did not hold back, and continued to scratch with both hands. Walala, walala, walala. In this way, in the garden in the corner of the kokio, a subtle and strange sound kept coming from the flower bed, and it was not until 10 minutes later that it gradually returned to normal. When Ryudo was sure that he had scratched in Hana, the section chief of the search department had already collapsed on him like a soft noodle. Her eyes were blurred, and saliva was dripping from the corner of her mouth. Her pretty face was red, and she looked like she had laughed too much. Suddenly, Ryudo smiled and asked in her ear, "Sister in Hana, are you satisfied with my service?" If it was a normal woman, she might have turned hostile on the spot after being scratched like this, but in Hana looked very satisfied. She took a deep breath, reached out and combed her sweat-soaked hair, and replied weakly, "Ryudo-kun, I didn't know you had such an ability. I almost fainted from laughing." In Hana did not know that Ryudo knew about her hobby. She only thought that Ryudo liked to play like this since he was born. For a moment, she liked this little handsome guy even more. After all, Ryudo was handsome and charming, and he liked to scratch her like this. He was simply in Hana's dream lover. Hee, as long as Sister in Hana is happy. Happy. But next time, I have to make my little lover happy. Speaking of this, in Hana touched Ryudo's head lovingly, and then slowly got up from the ground. Although Ryudo did not directly say that he wanted to be her lover, his actions just now were enough as an answer. This also caused in Hana to look at him differently. It seemed that she had no choice but to help. Well, there should still be time. After standing up from the flower bed, in Hana tidied up her clothes, and then smiled at Ryudo. "I will be waiting for orders at the Between 1,000 Grasses. If there are any problems, just contact me." As the head of the Heavenly Eye Group's guard department, in Hana naturally knew that there must be some unknown conspiracy behind Empress Wuda and Tian Ya's sudden actions. However, so far, the Heavenly Eye Group was still busy with their own affairs, and they had no time to pay attention to second-rate goods like Little and Tianya. In Hana's own sources of information were not enough to spy on the conspiracy, so she could only protect Ryudo from the side. After she got up, she said while pointing to a long and narrow courtyard in the south of the main hall not far away. The Between 1,000 Grasses was generally a place for the participants in the main hall to rest. Now most of the guests were also there, waiting for the official opening of the princess's coming-of-age ceremony. According to the previous announcement, Princess Fukudaheim's coming-of-age ceremony would be officially held at about 11 o'clock. After a series of ceremonies, the guests who came to watch the ceremony would eat in the Liensue Hall not far away, and then prepare for the afternoon press conference. Because in Hana's body was a little sticky, she hurriedly looked for a place to change her clothes, and Ryudo walked toward the main hall alone. At this time, there was less than half an hour left before 11 o'clock, and now more and more people were going to the main hall. Giant palm trees stood in the front yard of the main palace. The verdant evergreen trees and the grass that symbolized 1,000 years of longevity complemented each other, adding a mysterious and ancient color to the main palace. Although this new palace complex was only built a few decades ago, it was still not enough. The main hall of the kokio was divided into 3 rooms, namely Between the Pines, Between the Bamboos, and Between the Plums. Between the Pines was located in the center of the main hall. In the middle, there was a throne for the emperor and the empress. Traditionally, various ceremonies, appointments, awards, and other formal activities would be held here. Between the Bamboos was on the left side of Between the Pines. It was mainly a place for the emperor to meet state guests and officials. Between the Plums was on the right side of Between the Pines. It was a place for the empress to conduct official activities. It was also the empress's reception room and lounge. The inside of the main hall was magnificent. The ceiling was twisted and overlapped with colorful patterns. Between the patterns, colorful flowers were vivid. The surrounding walls were decorated with purple and red satin with dragon patterns. The ceiling was hung with satin curtains. The furniture was all made of black sandalwood, palm, and other hardwood. It looked gorgeous, elegant, and solemn. Although he didn't think highly of this small palace, when he came here, Ryudo could still feel the unique sense of luxury of the imperial family. The smell of burning money everywhere. Chapter 223. It was the first time Ryudo walked into this kind of palace building, so he looked around curiously. Because the event hasn't officially started yet, there were no guests in Pine Room. Only some staff members were fiddling with the wires, sound equipment, and so on for a while for interviews, audio recordings, and other activities. Putting a bunch of modern equipment in such an ancient palace greatly reduced the desire of others to visit. Although this palace was not big, it only took a few glances. Perhaps because there was nothing to see in the palace, most of the guests were either resting in the Thousand Grass Room not far away or looking for people to chat in the palace. There were not many people like Ryudo who walked around alone. And because Ryudo's clothes were very conspicuous when he wandered around, he could occasionally hear some comments. "Who is that young man? He looks quite handsome. He seems to be the second-generation leader of the Extreme Path organization, called something like Fighting Dragon." Fighting Dragon? What a strange name. It's really strange. It's probably the same breed as fighting dogs, fighting bulls, and crickets. Haha. At this moment, a fat and wealthy merchant at the entrance of the main hall laughed heartily with his female companion, who was hugging his arm as he watched the dragon fight. His words were full of joy. However, before they could laugh for a few seconds, a small stone flew out of nowhere like a bolt of lightning and hit the wealthy merchant in the teeth. Kacha! With a crisp sound, the two big front teeth of the rich businessman were directly broken and fell to the ground together with blood. Oh, woo 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 woo. Ah, what's going on? Help. For a time, the rich businessman knelt on the ground while holding his bleeding mouth, and his female companion next to him was already scared. She could only cover her cheek and shout. This shout immediately attracted the attention of the guards standing inside and outside the main hall. The surrounding staff, who were fiddling with the instruments, were also startled. Some of the guests who were chatting around were also startled by this sudden scene. However, just as all kinds of screams, cries, shouts rang out, creating a lively scene, the instigator, Long Do, had already slipped into a corridor at the side. There was no doubt that the small stone that suddenly flew out and broke the man's front teeth was naturally thrown by Ryudo with a skill. Hooligans don't die barehanded. As soon as this small stone was thrown, it directly gave the rich businessman with a foul mouth a crisp sound. He dared to show off in front of his female companion. Ryudo didn't bring a female companion, and he dared to bring her, and he dared to talk. It was simply a crime on top of crime. Just when Ryudo walked towards the corridor on the right, he actually just wanted to hide for a while. But he didn't expect to see a few strange guys walking towards him from the other end of the corridor. It was a group of three that looked strange. The middle-aged man walking in front had unnatural white skin. He wore a white robe with a strong holy aura, and on his head was a very recognizable black satin embroidered priest hat. In addition, this strange priest was holding a thick book with gold edges in his hand, and was swaggering towards him. However, compared to this strange priest, the first thing Long Do looked at was the two tall and burly men behind him. The two tall and strong men also had unnatural white skin, but compared to their skin, what was more unnatural was their body that was obviously more burly than normal people. It was as if they wanted to break through the bindings of their clothes, and their muscles were as hard as rocks. Even with a glance, one could see how powerful these two people were. However, this kind of burly body didn't match their heads very well, as if their bodies were forcefully inflated by something. An expert could easily sense that this wasn't a naturally cultivated physique. These two guys' bodies didn't seem right. It was a bit similar to that fatty from before. Seeing the group of three that was walking toward him, Ryudo immediately thought of one of the leaders of the psychedelic Saburo, Fatty Saburo. Although that fatty was born with a large skeleton, But because he had been using forbidden drugs for many years, it caused his muscles to swell unnaturally. It gave people a feeling that his muscles and body weren't on the same level. Oh, that's Russell. It really didn't take much effort. Just as Long Do was observing the two burly men, the priest holding the thick scripture also noticed him. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he walked over with a strange smile on his face. After arriving in front of Ryudo, the priest with a strange smile said with a smile, "Hello, I'm Father John of the Great Beauty Association. Nice to meet you." After the self-introduction, he extended his hand towards Ryudo. The smile on his face was even more brilliant, and even the corner of his mouth almost reached his ears. It looked really strange. Father John. It's really this guy. Ryudo wasn't surprised by the appearance of this fake priest. After all, this fake priest was the brother of the Empress, so it was natural for him to appear here. Even if the Empress wanted to set a trap to deal with Ryudo, then he and his Great Beauty Association should also be a big force in it. Thinking of this, Ryudo also held Father John's hand with a smile and sneered, "Do you know that this half-foreign and half-local way of speaking makes you look like a bastard? I hate bastards." "What? You are so..." Just as Father John was about to say, "You are so rude," a huge force suddenly came from the palms of the two holding each other. It directly squeezed the bones of the fake priest's hand until it made a cracking sound. At the same time, Ryudo pressed his wrist upward. Father John only felt a sharp pain in his wrist. His knees softened unconsciously, and he half knelt on the ground. Needless to say, the way he held his hands and knelt in the hallway made it seem as if Ryudo was the god in this fake priest's heart. Although Ryudo didn't need such a bastard believer. Under the stimulation of severe pain, Father John couldn't help but shout, "Let go! Let go! Help! Oh ho, don't you know how to speak the local language? Why do you want to be a bastard?" Ryudo continued to lock Father John's hand with a smile, and he suddenly threw a punch to the right without looking at the palm of a brawny man who was grabbing toward this side. The two brawny men behind Father John were obviously the bodyguards of the Great Beauty Association, and they were fed with forbidden medicine like Pang Sanlang. Their physical fitness was several times stronger than ordinary people. But just when the brawny man who rushed to the front stretched out his hand toward Ryudo, the punch hit his wrist like lightning. Crack! With a crisp sound, the brawny man's thick wrist was broken on the spot like a bubble. Even the sharp white bones inside had pierced through the skin and protruded out. Complex open fracture. If this injury was placed on ordinary people, they would probably be rolling on the ground in pain. But the brawny man didn't even frown, but he took half a step back and kicked out with his knee. He kicked his body, which weighed at least 150 kilograms, towards Long Do's face. Sure enough, it's the kind of modified person who can't feel pain, so troublesome. Just when Ryudo sighed that these guys didn't look like humans, the other brawny man also came around. He stealthily gave Long Do a bear hug from behind, firmly locking Long Do's body so that the youth had no way to block or dodge the next kick to his face. Although these two brawny men weren't martial arts masters, they were obviously veterans in fighting. They cooperated with each other quite tacitly and seamlessly. As the saying goes, random fists can kill an old master. For two brawny men to bear hug from the back, and the other to kick the face from the front. Although it was very vulgar, even martial arts masters could easily fall for this unethical hooligan fighting style. But for the current Ryudo, this level of coordinated attack was simply no threat at all. Hiss. Humph. Seeing that the kick that was enough to deform steel was about to hit his face, Ryudo quickly took a deep breath, and an unimaginable tyrannical force burst out from his right shoulder, accompanied by a cold snort. Now that Ryudo's left hand was locked with Father John's palm, he could only move his right arm freely. But that was enough. Just when his right shoulder and arm swung to the side, the brawny man, who was at least 300 pounds and about 2 meters behind him, was directly sent flying, as if he was hit by a truck. His whole body flew a few meters and collapsed on the floor behind him. In a situation where there was no room for him to use his strength, he was able to use only one arm to send such a strong man flying. This was not something that a person with LV4 physique could do. It was the ability of Qi. Using brute force to fight with the enemy was the lowest level of fighting method. Using techniques was the intermediate level of fighting method. And the highest level of fighting method was naturally to use Qi to activate the force. Only then would it be successful. But it wasn't over yet. In the next second, Ryudo's right elbow swept, and in a flash, his elbow hit the big foot that was kicking over. Along with a crisp cracking sound, the thick leg was also swept off. A few seconds later, before Father John could react, the bodyguard that he carefully selected from the Great Beauty Association had already uniformly fallen to the ground, one unconscious and one disabled. What the hell is this? Is he really human? Just when Ryudo pulled Father John up from the ground, Father John seemed to have seen a devil from hell, and not a living 16-year-old youth. Chapter 224. The two strong bodyguards, who had been modified by various drugs, had always protected Father John very well in the past. Both of them were not afraid of pain, and they were extremely strong. Their joint attacks were even more intimate. Even professional assassins would find it extremely difficult to get past them. However, these two extremely powerful bodyguards were like two clay figurines in front of Ryudo Kiryu. He could pinch and play with them as he wanted. This was a scene that he had never dreamed of. Father John was so scared that his face turned ashen, and his eyes became flustered. Because the chaos caused by Ryudo in the main hall not far away had not subsided, the battle in the corridor here did not attract people's attention. But this was obviously bad news for Father John. Seeing that the fake priest body began to tremble, Ryudo's face showed a kind smile and asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Why are you trembling like this? Don't tell me you're scared already?" At this time, although Ryudo's smile looked very kind, it was extremely terrifying in the eyes of Father John. He almost peed out of fear. After a while, Father John could only stutter back, I'm here to invite you to go to Between the Plum Blossoms. It has nothing to do with me." Sister's order? Between the Plum Blossoms. So that's the case. Empress Kabata sent someone to invite me over for a chat? Ryudo knew that this Between the Plum Blossoms was the room exclusive to the Empress in the 3 rooms of the main hall. The Empress would conduct official activities here, and it could also be used as a reception room and lounge. What Ryudo didn't expect was that Kabata would actually take the initiative to invite him over. What kind of show is this? Is this girl planning to accuse me of molesting her as soon as I go in and take off her clothes? Isn't she a bit too naive? After knowing that it was Kawatanya's invitation, Longdo casually put Father John's head under his shoulder and walked forward like a dog. He smiled and said, "If that's the case, then let's go. The Plum Blossom room is here, right?" Seeing that Ryudo was going to pull him along, Father John quickly shook his head. "Wait, Sister only invited you over. She didn't ask me to go with her. Don't say that. We've already shaken hands. If a machine gun suddenly pops out of the room and shoots at me, then you have the obligation to block the bullet for me." What kind of logic was this? When he heard Ryudo's words, Father John's originally unnaturally pale face turned into a ghostly color, and his body couldn't help but tremble. Obviously, Kabata's invitation to Ryudo this time was 100% unkind. Who knows what kind of insidious means the queen would play? Father John was the pathfinder prepared by Ryudo, or a walking million. No matter what happened in front of him, Ryudo would directly block this guy in front of him to make a friendly use of waste, so as not to inexplicably perform a sudden death. In this way, the two walked all the way forward in an intimate posture in the eyes of outsiders. They came from the side corridor of the main hall to the door with the plaque Plum Blossom not far away. The door made of black would exuded an antique atmosphere. The incense burners on both sides of the door were still lit with pure incense, rendering the surrounding atmosphere of Plum Blossom more elegant. However, compared to the heavily guarded situation in the main hall, there was no guard at the door of the Queen's office. This felt not right no matter how he thought about it, which increased the suspicion in Ryudo's heart. "You're older, you go first." After coming to the door, Ryudo opened the door with one hand and pushed Father John in with the other. Looking at his posture of pushing Father John forward, it was as if he was holding up a human shield with his hand. Along with the slight sound of the door being pushed open and the door being closed after entering, the room was silent and not a single sound could be heard. Although it was the Queen's office, this plum blossom didn't look very big, but there were many screens blocking the view inside. Ryudo pulled Father John around the screens and walked forward. It didn't take long for them to come to the end of the room and finally saw the woman sitting on the office chair. "Ryudo Kiryu, we finally meet." Seeing her brother being held hostage by Long-do like a dog, Kohishina, who was sitting on the office chair, didn't have a surprised expression at all. Instead, she said calmly. This calmness left a deep impression on Ryudo, especially after seeing Kabata-ya's attributes. At this time, Kabata-ya's attributes in the Rogue Analysis Mirror were like this. Name, Kabata-ya. Age, 43 years old. Attributes, Wisdom LV4, Physique LV2, Courage LV4, Insight LV4, Charm LV3. Judging from the level of each attribute, this woman was indeed an excellent talent enough to be a superior. Although they couldn't compare to Rue Hui and Yongji's superhuman abilities, Xiao and Tian yet had 3 attributes that reached the level of an international warrior, which was quite amazing. It was the first time Ryudo saw Kabata because she didn't appear in the game Red Album 2, No Survivors. This was a completely unfamiliar enemy for Ryudo. What would Owada Masa do? What does she want to do? What was his personality like? This was the key information that Ryudo didn't know. Even Rue Hui, who had been suspicious for a long time, wasn't very clear. It could only be said that this queen usually hid very well. Just as Ryudo was pondering, Father John, who was in his arms, whispered for help. "Sister, sister, save me." Ever since Long-do hugged his neck, Father John looked like he was about to die. But when he saw his sister, his eyes suddenly regained their vitality. "Big sister will come and save me. No matter what happens, my omnipotent big sister will be able to solve it." Obviously, in Father John's heart, sister was the omnipotent God, and the only God that Great Beauty Association needed to worship. However, Kabata nodded slightly after hearing her brother's words and replied faintly, "Ing, your mission is over." "Yes, but sister, this guy doesn't want to let me go." Just as Father John, Kabata-ing turned to look at Ryudo. The queen sitting in the office chair pressed a button on the table. Then something unexpected happened. Before Father John could finish his words, a mechanical sound of a spring suddenly came from the collar of his high-collared priest robe, and a cold light shot out from the inside of the collar like lightning. Because the speed was too fast, even Ryudo didn't see what happened clearly. It seemed that a sharp silk thread like a piano wire suddenly flew out from Father John's collar, and the silk thread directly cut through the middle of his throat, leaving a big gap in the neck of the president of Great Beauty Association. Huh? This is? The next second, blood spurted out from Father John's neck like a fountain, and the fake priest reached out and touched the cut on his neck in confusion, as if he couldn't believe that all this actually happened. This white priest suit was sent by his most respected sister this morning, and she told him to wear it well in this princess coming-of-age ceremony. But what Father John didn't expect was that there was actually such a lethal weapon installed in the collar of the priest's uniform, and the person to be killed was actually himself. Sister, are you out of your mind?" Just as Father John struggled to fall to the ground, he raised his head with a last trace of strength and looked at the woman not far away who was looking down at her dying brother with a cold gaze. What was the reason for all this? Father John didn't understand, and Ryudo was also puzzled at first, but he immediately understood. This woman wouldn't be so ruthless? Long-do frowned slightly at the sight of Father John lying on the ground covered in blood. Then he turned to the expressionless Empress Wutian Kohishina. Obviously, the younger brother of the Great Beauty Association, and the Empress was dead. And the most important thing was that it was Ryudo, a hoodlum leader, who took him from the corridor of the main hall into the between the plum blossoms. Judging from Tianya and Xiao Zhao's deployment, there should be many cameras outside that capture the scene of Long Do coercing Father John, who was Tian Yingyi and Xiao Xiao, walking in from the corridor. After that, Wado Young died in the between the plum blossoms, died beside Ryudo. So in the eyes of normal people, who killed the president of the Great Beauty Association? First of all, excluding the other living person, which was the current empress, the answer was self-evident. A Yakuza leader took the empress's younger brother hostage and broke into the empress's office. Then he slit the neck of the empress's relative and the president of the Japanese-American Friendship Association. That was the truth of the whole thing, or rather, the truth that was fabricated. Ryudo couldn't imagine how much pressure it would put on him and the Rulong group, and even the entire extreme Dao world if this news was spread out. Long Do couldn't help but applaud after understanding Konoha Tanya's plan. You're really vicious. You're even willing to use your own brother's life. Moreover, this guy is the president of that association, right? Don't you feel sad for him to die like this? The empress sneered. Sometimes the living are not as useful as the dead. You don't have to consider my feelings. You should think about what you should do next. You killed the empress's brother in the Kokyo. Well, since I killed him, killing one is enough, killing two is a win, then I might as well take you with me. At this moment, Ryudo grinned, and killing intent burst out in his eyes. His body turned into a white shadow and directly pounced at Wado Young, who was a few meters away. Chapter 225. The current situation was very obvious. That was, this Empress wooed a plan to frame him. And it had to be said that this guy had actually succeeded. From the moment Ryudo took the initiative to bring Father John to Plum Garden and stepped into the door, it was already destined that this extreme Do team leader would be framed to death. After all, in this plan, Xiaohe and Tian, you must have made sufficient preparations. This was the Kokyo, the territory of her, the Empress. In her own territory, the Empress was naturally in a state where she could cover the sky with one hand. It was easier than eating beans to frame an extreme. Do was already full of black spots. If you said you killed him, then you killed him. If you didn't kill him, then you killed him. Therefore, it was impossible for Ryudo to get rid of this framing through normal means. It was impossible in any case. Therefore, in this round, Xiao Yu and Tian, you won completely. Long Do could actually prepare to commit suicide and start all over again. But before committing suicide, he still had other things to do, and there were still many things to test. So in the next second, Ryudo's body flew over the front desk like a beast and rushed toward the Empress, who was slowly retreating. Now Ryudo's speed was so fast, and his lethality was so strong. If he was allowed to get close to Xiao Wakata, it would take less than a second to kill this Empress. But even so, there was still no trace of panic on Xiao Wakata's face. Obviously, this Empress, who had played through the conspiracy, had already expected that Ryudo would be desperate. Naturally, it was impossible for her to appear in front of him without any guarantee. However, even if she was mentally prepared, Xiao Wakata never thought that Ryudo's momentum would be so fierce. At this moment, the enemy's figure rushed over like an eagle. A fist that was not so huge, but seemed to contain infinite power blasted toward the Empress's head. The moment she was enveloped by Ryudo's fist wind, Kawada felt her breath catch in her throat, as if she was about to fall into a bottomless abyss. What a terrifying punch! Kawada had never thought that a human's fist could cause such a terrifying pressure. It felt as if a cannonball was flying towards her. If she were to take this punch head-on, she would definitely die. Moreover, it would be a very ugly death, where the entire head would be smashed into pieces like a watermelon. Unless there was a martial arts master who had also reached the transcendent state, ready to intercept Ryudo's attack at any time. Bang! Boom! Just as the punch was about to reach the Empress, Xiao and Tianya only saw a flash in front of their eyes, and a violent explosion accompanied by a strong shock wave directly exploded in front of them. She felt as if a grenade or some other kind of bomb had suddenly exploded a meter away from her. The explosion sounded again and again, and the crazy airflow even made the Empress, who had been training her body, unable to stand steadily. She almost fell to the ground as she retreated. Just as Xiao Wakata finally managed to stabilize herself by holding onto the wall behind her, the shockwave that engulfed the entire Plum Blossom Garden finally disappeared, and most of the erected screens had already fallen to the ground. When the smoke dissipated, Xiao Wakata opened her eyes and saw the two men and the scene of two fists colliding with each other. One fist looked smaller, and the skin was tighter and smoother, showing the youthful physique unique to minors. The other fist was much larger, and the skin looked as rough as polished diamond sand, and it was covered with all kinds of scars. From the visual effect of the two fists, they were not on the same level at all. But when the two sides collided, it produced the terrifying shockwave that was like an explosion just now. From this point of view, the owners of the two fists were at least on par with each other in terms of strength. At this time, the man who suddenly rushed out from the side and met the Ryudo fist with lightning speed was naturally the strongest general under Owatamasa's command. Saito entered Ao. Xiao Wakata would definitely not do something as stupid as facing Ryudo Kiryu alone. Therefore, she had already arranged for Daichi to hide behind a nearby screen, and he could come out at any time to restrain this crazy young man. However, after blocking Ryudo's punch, Daichi frowned slightly and said, "Stinky brat, you've improved a little." As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. From Ryudo's punch just now, Daichi could clearly feel that the quality of it was completely different from the fight in the Rulong Group headquarters a week ago. A week ago, Ryudo was just a martial arts rookie who only knew how to squander his powerful physical strength. Although he could also use some ancient martial arts that he had learned the essence of, as long as he did not know how to use chi, it was nothing in front of Daichi. But only a week later, when Ryudo appeared again, he was a completely different person. The punch just now seemed to be aimed at Xiao Wakata, but in fact, Daichi could clearly feel that it was aimed at him, which meant that Ryudo had actually discovered his existence long ago. Furthermore, within the fist force of that punch, those who had entered the Tao could clearly sense an unusually domineering force. It was as if the strength of Long Do's palm, wrist, arm, shoulder, upper body, waist, and lower body had all fused together at the instant he punched out. This caused the force to stack layer upon layer, and it was extremely turbulent like a huge wave. There was no doubt that this was a punch that could only be made after he had mastered the ability of chi and mobilized all the blood in his body. To be able to make such a punch, it meant that Ryudo was not as simple as opening up chi, but at least he had reached the early stage of being able to freely use obvious strength. Although it was only the early stage, it was enough to surprise Daichi. Speaking of which, it was already very unreasonable for such a young man in his teens to be able to practice obvious strength. The most ridiculous thing was that he did not even know what chi was a week ago. Monster. This kid was either a monster or a unique martial arts genius in history. He definitely couldn't let him leave this place alive. Daichi looked at Ryudo, who was urging his strength to block his fist, with an excited expression on his face. Daichi secretly gritted his teeth and made up his mind to kill him here no matter what. Otherwise, he did not dare to imagine what kind of existence Ryudo would become if he was given another 8 to 10 years. Perhaps he would become the kind of superhuman who could destroy the entire Kokyo with a single punch and would have to use kryptonite to deal with him. Just as Daichi secretly made up his mind, Ryudo excitedly smiled and said, "Shorty, actually I was wondering if I could break your fist with one punch, but in the end I still couldn't. What a pity." In fact, the moment Ryudo stepped into between the plum trees, he had already noticed the existence of Daichi. The punch just now was indeed not aimed at Kohishina. In fact, it was prepared to launch a sneak attack on Tao accessing realm. He wanted to see if he could trick him. Unfortunately, he did not succeed. This guy's fist was unbelievably hard. After hearing Ryudo's words, Daichi was stunned at first. Then he suddenly became furious. "You stinking brat actually wanted to break my well-tempered fist? Who are you looking down on, bastard? Humph. Shameless boasting. You don't know what's good for you. Daichi snorted coldly, and his free left hand swung like a poisonous snake, swiftly launching a second attack. This was an earth-shattering claw, and a series of explosive booms erupted once again. The Tao-reaching realm cultivator's rough palm was like a huge tower that was suppressing a white snake, and it grabbed toward Long Do's neck with immeasurable force. At the same time, Daichi immediately circulated chi throughout his body, and his entire left hand swelled up like a sponge that was full of water. The suddenly plentiful muscles directly burst the clothes on his arm from the inside, showing how strong his strength was. For a top master who could control chi to a certain extent, it was easy to freely shrink the size of his muscles and exert the strength of every inch of muscle to the limit. Although Daichi's body looked very short after many years of hard training, his body was actually covered with steel-like muscles, and after the circulation of chi, it was completely reflected. Although his grab seemed light, it was actually the culmination of many years of martial arts techniques. The angle was extremely tricky, the speed was as fast as lightning, and the strength could easily twist steel into a fried dough twist. Unfortunately, although Daichi was fast, the current Ryudo was not slow either. His free left hand also swung out like lightning and accurately grabbed Daichi's palm that was grabbing towards him. When the two hands collided, there was a sound of metal clashing. This sound made Kawada, who was hiding and trembling not far away, think that it was not flesh and blood that collided, but the steel hands of two robots. However, although Daichi's palm was grabbed by Ryudo, and it looked like they were going to wrestle again, Daichi was happy when he saw this scene. This idiot. Does he think that I'm going to compete with him in terms of grip strength? Back when the two first met in the Tokyo Emperor Hotel, Ryudo and Daichi had competed in terms of grip strength, and there was no clear winner. However, that was just a competition between Daichi, and it did not really reflect the strength of Daichi. After all, as a martial arts master, how could he only know such small tricks? He had mastered so many exquisite martial arts techniques that he did not need to rely on brute force to defeat Ryudo. And in this case, the power of Vajra Finger of Tantra could be fully displayed. A martial arts technique like Vajra Finger of Tantra could make one's fingers and palm as hard as Vajra. In addition to direct poking, palm grabbing, and other common attacks, there was also the small grappling technique attributed. Chapter 226. There were many types of martial arts in the world, and each country had its own unique style. But at the end of the day, most martial arts were related to the four major systems of kicking, hitting, throwing, and grabbing. For example, Saito Ryudo, who was born with a special physique and short limbs, was not suitable for kicking and throwing martial arts. Therefore, he focused his energy on hitting and grabbing. Needless to say, hitting martial arts, Ryudo's every move, every punch, and every palm were fatal. And in terms of grabbing martial arts, his lesser grappling technique was also top-notch. Generally speaking, grabbing martial arts were divided into lesser grappling technique that targeted the joints of the fingers, wrists, and elbows, and greater grappling technique that targeted the joints of the shoulders, knees, neck, and spine. This was especially true for the lesser grappling technique, which relied on small changes to win. Its moves were delicate and varied, and it could make infinite changes in a limited space. It was very suitable for Ryudo, who had already strengthened his fingers. Therefore, every time Ryudo fought with others in the past, Ryudo could use the lesser grappling technique to control the enemy's acupuncture points, joints, and other parts, and even destroy them. Stinking brat, your fingers are mine. The moment their palms touched, Ryudo sneered and suddenly squeezed his thumb inwards. At the same time, he twisted his index and middle fingers outwards, intending to break Ryudo's fingers on the spot. With such an exquisite lesser grappling technique combined with the ferocious power of the Vajra Finger of Tantra, there were not many people in the world who could block this move. Unless the opponent had the ability to resist the lesser grappling technique and understood the lesser grappling technique very well. Therefore, in the next moment, something that Ryudo did not expect happened. Before he could fully execute his lesser grappling technique to break Ryudo's fingers, the young man suddenly twisted his wrist, and his left hand twisted inwards at a strange angle. At the same time, his elbow loosened and pulled, causing Ryudo's wrist to lose its strength. What the hell? Before Ryudo could react, he heard a strange cracking sound coming from his wrist. It made one's scalp go numb. Fortunately, Meng Qi was also a rare martial Dao master. His body immediately spun rapidly, and with the help of the spinning force, he forced Ryudo to let go and retreat. Only then did he escape from the young man's hands. My wrist actually? This brat also knows the small grappling technique? After the two of them separated again, Access Dao realized that his left wrist was hanging limply. Obviously, this was a sign that someone had dislocated his wrist. For so many years, only those who had entered the Dao could remove the joints of others. The number of times one's own joints had been removed could be counted on one's fingers. If the one who did this was a teenager, then the situation was even more terrifying. It could be said that Saito had never been so shocked in his entire life. Even though he already knew that Long Do was a monster, he didn't expect this little monster to have such a high level of skill. In a split second, he was able to turn the tables on him. However, no matter how confused Access Dao's mind was, he was still in the midst of a fierce battle. He immediately grabbed the soft and slack left hand with his right hand and twisted it. Another crisp sound rang out, and the hand that had just been removed was deftly put back in place. However, although this kind of direct wrist dislocation technique was brilliant, it was accompanied by extreme pain. However, a tough guy like Access Dao obviously didn't care about such a small matter. At this moment, Ryudo's figure had already stepped to the side of Access Dao. He bent his knees slightly, and his elbow violently slammed into the enemy's head like a rapidly charging siege engine. Compared to ordinary people, Access Dao was short and small. Because of this, he was vulnerable to attacks. Some of the more conventional moves would be difficult to hit him, and he had to lower his body. Access Dao swung his right fist, using a clever move to remove the force from Ryudo's elbow, and then directly to the meridians in his arm. At the same time, his left hand moved from bottom to top toward Ryudo's nether regions. He was going to give him a monkey steals the peach. Although this kind of fighting style was a little dirty, it was a death match after all. The winner was standing, and the loser was lying down. No one cared about whether it was dirty or dirty. This set of movements was smooth and smooth. The shadow of the fist was enough to kill. It was very dangerous. Of course, at this time, Ryudo was no longer going to be killed by this level of attack. Therefore, he nimbly turned around and dodged Access Dao's deadly punch. Just like this, the two of them fiercely fought in this small between the plum trees. They went back and forth, one retreated and one advanced. For a time, the shadow of the fist flashed, and the force spread. The impact was like a storm that almost cracked the floor, ceiling, walls, and other areas of the between the plum trees. As for the original decorations inside, naturally, they were already shattered by this scene comparable to a monster battle. It was so messy that it looked like a garbage dump. However, when she saw such an exaggerated battle scene, Cohesion, who had already escaped from the back door and came outside to watch the battle, was already dumbfounded. What's going on? Are these two guys really human? Are they some alien creatures in disguise? Why do they look like they're in a movie? Although Owadaya had many identities, was ruthless, and was knowledgeable, she was still a person who lived and grew up in modern society. Any normal person would find it hard to imagine that there would be such a monster in the world that could make the sound of metal clashing when a punch and a kick collided. The movement could even crack the floor and ceiling. The most exaggerated thing was that there was more than one monster like this. When Owadaya saw the strength of Saito for the first time, she was already very shocked. In her opinion, Saito was like the hidden masters in the movies. It belonged to the top of human beings in the world. Unless various modern weapons were used, there was no way to fight against this guy. But what she never expected was that now, in front of Awadaya, another monster of almost the same level appeared. And this monster was actually a teenager. This really made the queen almost numb. She even considered whether to capture Ryudo alive for research, but after considering that it was difficult to capture him alive, she reluctantly gave up this plan. However, when she saw the two terrifying superhumans fighting in the between the plum trees through the window, Awadaya still thought for a while before pressing the emergency call button. Beep beep, beep beep, beep beep. Almost at the moment when the button was pressed, a fierce alarm spread throughout the between the plum trees, and even most of the guests in the Kokyo could hear it clearly. At this time, the guests who had gathered in various corners of the Kokyo and were about to come to watch the ceremony immediately noticed that something unexpected had happened. What's going on? Is there any movement over there? It's an emergency alarm. It's coming from the between the plum tree side. Then what are you waiting for? Run. Not long after the alarm sounded, most of the guests who had rushed to watch the ceremony quickly evacuated under the escort of the guards, and a group of armed guards also quickly rushed in the direction of the between the plum trees. Among the evacuating crowd, Ruehue Kamishiro, who was about to meet up with Ryudo, was naturally mixed in. That alarm. Was it Ryudo? What happened over there? Although Ruehue wanted to go over and see what was going on in the between the plum tree side, the situation now had become extremely chaotic. She was surrounded by people and armed guards who were evacuating in a hurry. Even if Ruehue wanted to go against the flow of people and return to the between the plum trees side, it was completely impossible. At the same time, Colored Glaze and the others who were watching from the top of a building outside the Kokyo naturally immediately noticed the sudden chaos. It's Ryudo. Looking through the binoculars at the guests who were evacuating quickly, Colored Glaze immediately frowned and said, "It must be that guy who caused the commotion. This is troublesome." Immediately, Sensible, who was next to her, quickly asked, then, "Big sister, can we help the boss evacuate? Now that the Kokyo is surrounded by a dense group of guards, it's impossible to go in and help. We can only pray that Ryudo can run out on his own, and we'll be outside ready to help at any time." Having said that, Colored Glaze couldn't help but sigh. At the same time, she secretly prayed that Ryudo could successfully escape. As for what happened after that, Colored Glaze had already made sufficient arrangements. No matter which direction Ryudo escaped in, there would be someone to help him immediately. However, just when the ear-piercing alarm spread throughout the Kokyo, even the reporters outside noticed that an unprecedented event was about to happen. In the between the plum trees that was the focus of the crowd, a group of armed guards quickly rushed in with their weapons and surrounded Ryudo and Access to Do at the same time. Humph. Access to Do immediately fainted and retreated while blocking Ryudo's last escape route to the windowsill. "Stinky brat, you're finished." Seeing dozens of automatic rifles around him pointed at Ryudo's body, Access to Do sneered as if he was gloating. Although it was a pity that he couldn't kill Ryudo personally, Access to Do didn't mind using modern weapons, such as firearms, to send this brat to heaven. In short, it was fine as long as he could kill him. But what Access to Do didn't expect was that even in this situation, Ryudo's face still had a relaxed expression. "Oh, really?" he asked with a smile. "You don't think these broken things can kill me, right? Broken things? Humph, stinky brat, times have changed. Even if you have copper skin and iron bones, you can't block the power of bullets. Times have changed. It has indeed changed, but the person who will always walk in front of the times is me." As he blurted out, "It's me," Ryudo's hand that was hidden behind him quickly flung forward. 3 flash bombs with the safety off quickly flew to every corner of the between the plum trees. Chapter 227. As for the princess coming-of-age ceremony incident this time, Ryudo naturally knew that the stinky queen must have a bellyful of evil tricks up her sleeves to kill him. She invited him over with malicious intentions. Moreover, this time, there was a mortal enemy in the enemy's camp, which made it even more dangerous. However, unlike the previous Dunya kidnapping incident, after entering the Kokyo this time, there were not many people who could help Ryudo, except for Rue Hui. Later on, he found out that Lin Hua could also be a helper. Therefore, before deciding to go to the dragon's den, Ryudo really had to prepare everything carefully, especially after the 300 million yen ransom was transferred back by Gao Yuan a few days later. The amount of money Ryudo could use to buy money was even more enormous. Ryudo had a huge sum of 172.87 million inch in his hands. Previously, after purchasing the Qian Kuan Foundation technique and the Empress Mysterious technique, he spent 40 million. So the total funds were left with for 32.8 million inch. With this money, Ryudo first needed to upgrade his basic attributes. Although it was not enough to upgrade his physique to LV5, it was enough to upgrade the other attributes again. Therefore, Ryudo spent a total of 150 million to purchase the second attribute upgrade of wisdom, courage, and insight respectively. In this way, Ryudo had the true bucket attributes of wisdom LV3, physique LV4, courage LV4, insight LV3, charm LV4. The significance of the consecutive upgrade of the three attributes was very obvious. This way, Ryudo's brain could work faster, and he could be more calm in the face of changes. His dynamic vision and insight ability would also be stronger. Now, although he was still not as invincible as an alien like I am, in terms of average attributes, he was already far above ordinary people. It could be said that he was developing in the direction of Superman. After purchasing the most important attributes, Ryudo continued to choose to purchase the large pile of skill books in the skill shop. First of all, he had to purchase Iron Bone Mastery and Copper Skin Mastery. This was the third time he had purchased these two skill books. While raising the proficiency to 60%, the price had also increased from 1 million to 2 million to 4 million. However, it was still worth it. After that, Ryudo chose to purchase two extremely useful combat skills, Rogues Don't Die by Bare Hands and Ancient Eight Extremities Fist. He spent 12 million yuan each to increase the proficiency of these two skills to 40%. Then, he looked at the blank skill book in the corner of the shop. Since Ryudo had died, this skill book that could increase the proficiency of any skill had been refreshed. However, the cost of the second purchase had doubled, becoming 20 million yuan. Ryudo still used this blank skill book to upgrade his Furamaki-style martial arts. After all, his skills in the shop could be upgraded by refreshing the shop to purchase skill books. However, this thing could not be bought by refreshing the shop. He could only use the blank skill book. After using the blank skill book to increase the proficiency of Furamaki-style martial arts to 41%, Ryudo unexpectedly learned a second skill, Profound Meaning of the Body, Hard Tackle. Different from Profound Meaning of the skill, Tiger Fall, although this Profound Meaning of the Body was also a counterattack skill. It was both offensive and defensive. It was a more hard-hitting counterattack skill. After learning Hard Tackle, Ryudo could contract part of his muscles the moment the enemy attacked, turning the hit point into a shield to destroy the enemy's fist. According to Ryudo's own experiments, this Profound Meaning of the Body, when used together with Copper Skin Mastery, Iron Bone Mastery, and Chi, the effect could only be described as invincible. In the experiment, he let Narukai use the katana to chop his hand with all his strength, and at the same time, he activated Hard Tackle. In the end, the katana was broken by Ryudo's arm. Ryudo's arm, however, remained unharmed. Ryudo could still remember Ming Hai's gaze, which didn't seem like he was looking at a human. After buying so many skills, Ryudo only had 240 million left in his funds. At this time, he had his eyes on the two new skill books that he accidentally saw. The first skill book was called Dragonbone Dislocation Hand, and it looked like an ancient martial arts skill book of the grappling system, of the kicking grappling system. That's right, that guy who had entered the Tao had great martial arts skills, and he was very good at close combat. Should I get a grappling system martial arts skill to deal with that guy? When he saw this skill book, Ryudo had this thought. Currently, Ryudo's raw strength was not much inferior to that of a Taoist, but he was still far behind when it came to finer techniques. If he entered the stage of close combat, it would obviously be disadvantageous for Ryudo. Therefore, Ryudo spent 3 million to buy the Dragon Bone Dislocation Hand skill book and learned this grappling martial arts skill that was known as grappling, 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 breaking tendons and dislocating bones. This was also the reason why he suffered a small loss when he entered the Tao later on. The second skill book was called Firearms Proficiency, and as the name implied, it could increase the proficiency of various firearms, and was also worth 3 million. At this time, Ryudo already had considerable combat strength in hand-to-hand combat and weapon battles, but his only weakness was firearms. After all, no matter how strong Ryudo was, or how exquisite his techniques were, it was meaningless when he used firearms and other weapons to shoot. However, now that he had firearms proficiency, it was different. His ability to control firearms was much more proficient, and he could turn into Brother Ma at any time to shoot with 2 guns and go on a killing spree. However, after buying the 2 new skills, Ryudo was a little unhappy when he saw that Dragon Bone Dislocation Hand and Firearms Proficiency only had 20% proficiency. Thinking about it carefully, these 2 new skills, Heaven and Earth Foundation Technique and Princess Mysterious Technique, only had 20% proficiency, and it was probably not enough to deal with those who had entered the Tao. Should he try to kill himself a few times to refresh? For so long, Ryudo had not tried to kill himself to refresh the shop. The main problem was that the money he had on hand was very limited, and there was no way he could squander it like this. However, even after buying so many things, Ryudo still had a huge sum of more than 230 million on hand. Wouldn't it be a pity if he didn't refresh it? Most importantly, Ryudo had just received a huge sum of 300 million from Gao Yuan not long ago. If he killed himself now and went back to the time before he received that sum of money, wouldn't he be able to get it again? If he could get another 300 million every time he killed himself, then Ryudo might as well just keep killing himself. Wouldn't he be invincible if he killed himself a few hundred times? Although he knew that there was a high probability that such a good thing would not happen, Ryudo still changed to the Desperado title that reduced his money consumption. He reached out and poked his heart, listening to the familiar sound that began life rewinding. However, when Ryudo regained consciousness, he found himself standing in the same place with his phone. It was almost as if he had rewound to loneliness. Except for the loss of 800,000 yuan in Ryudo's fun pool and all the skills in the shop refreshed, nothing else changed. This was the backtracking point that Ryudo returned to. After thinking for a while, Ryudo finally figured out the judgment point of the system's backtracking with his LV3 wisdom. Every time the system should determine that the host is dead, it would let the host pay the money to go back in time. There were 2 judgment points for backtracking. The first judgment point was before the start of this incident. This was easy to understand. Most of the previous backtracking was based on this foundation. The second judgment point was what Ryudo just understood. That was after the money entered the account. After backtracking, Ryudo happened to be holding his phone. The phone showed that the 300 million yen that Gao Yuan had transferred had just been transferred to his account. And now the money in his bank card had become more than 230 million, which was the amount after the purchase. In other words, as long as Ryudo received the money, the backtracking point would immediately change from before the incident to after the money entered the account. This kind of backtracking point change could be said to block Ryudo's way of making money through crooked means. So, he couldn't rely on backtracking to get the 300 million yuan from Gao Yuan multiple times. No matter where he got the money, as long as he got the money, even if he committed suicide on the spot after taking the money, the backtracking point would become the moment he got the money. It had to be said that this pay-to-win system was really sneaky. It didn't allow people to take advantage of loopholes at all. But having said that, Ryudo also knew what he couldn't do, which was to take other people's money. If Ryudo had money in some events, then the backtracking point would change. This change might cause a situation similar to a dead file, leading to a dead end no matter how he backtracked. For example, Ryudo had just taken a sum of money, and then a bomb dropped and blew him to pieces. In this case, even if he backtracked, he could only backtrack to the moment after he took the money. As long as he couldn't run out of the bomb's range, he would die no matter how many times he backtracked. Of course, this kind of situation was very extreme and might not happen, but it was always right to be more careful. After backtracking, the shop refreshed again. Ryudo generously bought another round of Chien Kuan Foundation Technique 40 million, Princess's Mysterious Art 40 million, Blank Skill Book 40 million, Steelbone Mastery 8 million, Bronze Skin Mastery 8 million, Ancient Bajiquan 12 million, Hooligan Undying 12 million, Bone Twisting Hand 6 million, and Firearms Mastery 6 million. At this time, Ryudo only had 64 million yuan left. He took out another 30 million yuan to find his old friend from the Big Dipper Alliance, Kai Yang, and asked the strongest arms dealer in Tokyo to buy some heavy firepower equipment. After a round of crazy buying, and buying, Long Do's attributes had become like this. Name, Ryudo Kiryoage, 16 attributes. Wisdom LV3, Vitality LV4, Courage LV4, Insight LV3, Charm LV4 Chi Opening Rate. 41% title, Rich Fool, acquired after spending more than 500 million yuan. Equipment slot will increase by 2 slots. Equipment. AK-103 Assault Rifle Elite, Rope Hook Good, Throwing Magazine Good, M60 Machine Gun Elite, RPG-32 Individual Rocket Launcher Elite, Personal Equipment, None Tools. Hooligan Velcro, Hooligan Analysis Mirror, Hooligan Voice Changing Mask, Hooligan Hang Glider Skills. Chien Kuan Foundation Technique, Princess's Mysterious Art, Ancient Bajiquan, Furamaki Style Martial Arts, Bone Twisting Hand, Steel Bone Mastery, Copper Skin Mastery, Parkour. Master, Hooligan Undying 12 million, Silent Movement, Aura Shield, Omnipotent Driver. Firearms Mastery Total Assets. 34 million yuan with such ridiculous attributes, skills, and equipment. Long Do did not panic even if he was surrounded by dozens of armed guards who had reached the Dao-reaching realm. Chapter 228. In this situation, where he was fully prepared, no matter how many enemies appeared in front of him, they were nothing more than cannon fodder for Ryudo. In an instant, 3 flash bombs with the safety off quickly flew to every corner of between the plum blossoms and exploded in the air. Although when entering the Kokyo, all guests had to go through a body search to ensure that they didn't bring any weapons, this kind of inspection was obviously useless against Ryudo. With the new title Rich Fool, Ryudo could now put as many as 5 pieces of equipment in his equipment slot. In addition to the 3 heavy firepower weapons, AK-103 Assault Rifle, M60 Machine Gun, and RPG-32 Rocket Launcher bought from Kaiyang, Ryudo also bought a grenade box, which could put 10 small hand-thrown ammunition. At this time, the grenade box was stuffed with a bunch of throwing weapons, from Ryudo's favorite flash bomb to the heavy firepower grenade to the smoke bomb. It could be said that there was everything. What? Just when the 3 flash bombs quickly flew in all directions, the guards who were ready to shoot at Ryudo were suddenly dumbfounded. Although the guards responsible for protecting the Kokyo weren't very powerful, they at least received some training. So when they saw the flash bombs flying in this direction, they didn't hesitate to lie down and cover their ears with both hands. Although this couldn't completely avoid the impact, it could reduce the impact to a relatively low level. Access to Do was even faster. The moment the flash bombs flew over, he had already rushed out of a room and quickly contracted the muscles in his ears to isolate the sound. Bang! Accompanied by a strong explosion and dazzling light at the same time, not to mention the guards in between the plum blossoms. Even Kawada, who was running outside the wall, was greatly affected. Bang! At that moment, Kawada only felt a buzzing sound in her head, and at the same time, her vision turned white, and she almost lost consciousness. How did he do it? Just as Kawada was kneeling on the ground in a daze, she couldn't figure out how Ryudo managed to bring in so many flashbangs. A strong and powerful arm suddenly stretched out from behind and grabbed the Empress collar, lifting her up from the ground. before the Empress could react. Her body had soared into the sky and flew directly to the roof of the main hall next to her. Right now, the surroundings of the main hall could be said to be quite lively. All kinds of shouts, roars, commands, and cries could be heard incessantly. Groups of people were running around like ants on a hot pan. Among them, a middle-aged man in a pure white silk imperial robe stood out among the group of modern guards and guests. Although he looked like an actor who had just left the set and forgot to change his clothes, this middle-aged man was actually the current Heavenly Emperor Wuda, who was also Xiao Hetianya's husband. However, although he was the emperor of a country at this time, the Heavenly Emperor was full of impatience. He kept complaining to the chief guard standing beside him. "Haven't you brought the Empress out yet? What the hell are you doing?" I'm sorry, Heavenly Emperor, we have sent the nearest guard to Plum Blossom, and we should be able to rescue the Empress soon. After feeling the dissatisfaction of the country's #1 mascot next to him, the seemingly old guard couldn't help but take out a handkerchief to wipe the sweat on his forehead. Obviously, he was also very anxious. What is this? What the hell is going on? The princess coming-of-age ceremony was about to start, but an emergency alarm suddenly sounded at the Plum Blossom, where the Empress was. This sudden situation really made many people feel like they were going bald. However, just as the head of the guards continued to arrange for the guards to charge over there, ready to save Her Highness even if all of them were to die, two figures suddenly appeared on the roof of the main hall not far away. At this time, a sharp-eyed guard saw the situation above the main hall first, so he quickly shouted, Look at the roof of the main hall. Isn't that the Empress?" As soon as the words came out, everyone was shocked. They quickly looked up and saw that there were indeed two figures on top of the two-story main hall. One of them was pulling the other to the center, like a dog. The woman being pulled was naturally the Empress that everyone was very familiar with, and the other person pulling her to the center of the roof was a young man in a flashy white suit. What's going on? Kidnapping? Kidnapping? Who is that young man? Just as the people below were completely confused about what was going on, but because the Empress was in the hands of the criminal, Heavenly Emperor Wu couldn't help but shout, "The person up there, hurry up and let go of the Empress. Otherwise, you will die without a burial place." Usually, Heavenly Emperor Wu was a middle-aged man who looked very spineless and didn't have anything to do with the word emperor at all. If he was thrown into a company, it would be easy for people to mistake him for an old social worker who worked from 9 to 5. However, no matter how weak and spineless a man was, when he saw his wife being held hostage by evil people, he couldn't help but yell out. Although Longdo didn't know what to say when he heard this yell. "Did you hear that? Your husband said that if I don't let go of you, I will die without a burial place." Ryudo smiled when he heard that. He reached out and patted Konoha's face, who was gradually recovering her consciousness, to help her wake up faster. After waking up, the Empress realized that she was actually on the roof of the main hall, and there were at least a few hundred guards nearby. A group of people stared at the spectacular scene of their Empress being held hostage by Ryudo. When she realized how embarrassing she was now and how dangerous the situation was, the calm expression on Konoha's face finally loosened. There was no doubt that Ryudo was now ready to go all out. Just as he had said at the beginning, killing one was enough for him. Killing two would earn him a profit, and the more he killed, the more he would earn. In that case, wouldn't he be free to go all out? So now Ryudo didn't mind killing this Empress at all. In this Kokyo, in front of the Heavenly Emperor and a group of lackeys, he would twist this woman's head off on the spot. Mad Dog, for Ryudo Kiryu. The only word Konoha could think of to describe him was Mad Dog. As long as you provoked him, you would be greeted with 10 times or 100 times the passionate return, without caring about the consequences. He was simply not a normal person. Konoha naturally didn't want to die. She still had many ambitions that she hadn't completed. How could she be dragged down by this Mad Dog? Wouldn't that be too stupid? So she couldn't help but persuade. "Ryudo-kun, don't be impulsive. I think we need to talk." "There's a need to talk." "All right, but you have to make that guy back off first." Otherwise, I might accidentally break your neck." Ryudo had already placed his hand on the back of Kawada's neck. At the same time, he looked at the side of the roof not far away, looking at Saito Rudo, who was glaring at them. In fact, after dodging the flash bomb attack, although Saito wanted to go back to protect his master, he was still one step behind Ryudo. He could only watch Konoha being dragged to the roof. Seeing his master being held hostage by such a stinking brat, Entering Dao was naturally infuriated, to the point where his anger was at a level of 3,000 feet. However, no matter how angry he wasn't stupid enough to yell at someone like the Emperor. If he forced the dragon fighter into a corner and killed Owada Masada in front of everyone, everything would be over. With Ryudo's current strength, if he wanted to kill Konoha, no one would be able to stop him. Even if a sniper shot him in the head, he would still be able to take the person he was holding with him before his head was blown off. So when Konoha fell into Ryudo's hands, the situation had been completely reversed. The option of safely rescuing the hostage from Ryudo's hands did not exist from the beginning. Even if the Heavenly Emperor came, it would not be possible. Konoha naturally understood this, so she quickly nodded to Saito, and Saito also tactfully took a few steps back and asked the guards who were about to climb to the roof to participate in the rescue to get as far away as possible. Now, if she wanted to save her life, what she needed was not strength, but wisdom and eloquence. And wisdom and eloquence happened to be the things this queen was best at. So now she planned to seize the last chance of survival with her own ability. No matter what, she had to persuade Ryudo not to kill her. No matter how many promises he made, he would not refuse. After all, he only had one life. Without his life, everything would be meaningless. At this time, the queen advised again, "Ryudo-kun, in fact, you are still young. There is no need to go to such a dead end. Give me a chance, and I will give you a chance. You are really thick-skinned. You are the one who forced us into this dead end. If you didn't plan to frame me, there wouldn't be so much trouble, right? Why are you saying these words?" Ryudo's face showed a sarcastic expression, but Konoha continued to say, without care, "Then I will ask, what do you want to let me go? I can satisfy all your conditions." "Satisfy all my conditions? Actually, I just want to ask you a few questions, but you only have 5 seconds to answer. If you exceed it, your head will fall to the ground. How about that?" Just like when Ryudo was threatened by Iam in the unrestrained tower, this time, it was his turn to propose this pleasant 5-second question and answer. But compared to Iam's punishment of breaking a finger if you exceed it, Ryudo was obviously more ruthless, and his head fell to the ground. Chapter 229. In Ryudo's opinion, he had played too much this time, and there was no turning back. In the end, he had to backtrack. Even if Kobayashi said that she wanted to give each other a chance and not fight to the death, even a fool would know that she just wanted to escape with her words. How could he let her go? After all, Ryudo was now the man who killed the royal family in the Kokyo and held the Empress hostage in front of the Emperor and so many people. After this, even if he let the Empress go, he would probably be executed on the spot. There was no room for negotiation. In this case, Ryudo changed his strategy and planned to use his life to gather as much information as possible. In fact, until now, Ryudo had always had a big doubt. What was Kobayashi planning to do? As the queen of a country, she was essentially a chess piece used by American to restrain and restrict the royal family. That should be the case. But in fact, this woman did a lot of things behind the scenes that made people feel that this chess piece seemed to have her own thoughts. For example, Kobayashi secretly controlled the White Tiger Society and Psychedelic Saburo in an attempt to take over the entire Kyoto in Tokyo. It was hard to believe that American asked her to do this. There was also the Ryudo murdering Father John this time. It felt that there was something in this that was difficult to explain with common sense. If it was just to frame Ryudo, Kobayashi didn't need to sacrifice her brother's life. Even the death of a guard was enough to put Ryudo to death. She didn't need to use her family as bait, right? The reason why Kobayashi took the initiative to sacrifice Father John's life shouldn't be as simple as framing Ryudo. She should be planning to use this to do something else in the future. So Ryudo was really curious now about what this woman was planning to do. When she heard the question from behind, Kobayashi was taken aback at first. Then she quickly nodded, indicating that she was willing to follow this pleasant 5-second question and answer principle. 5 seconds. He only had 5 seconds to answer. This meant that it was very difficult to make up a reasonable lie. At the same time, it also meant that the slightest hesitation would be seen through immediately. At this moment of life and death, Xiaohua and Tian, you could only focus all their attention and try to make their next answer to satisfy Ryudo. Otherwise, everything would be over. However, after hearing Ryudo's question, the queen couldn't help but frown. Ryudo's question was, "This time, you didn't just plan to deal with me, right? What are you going to do next?" Although she had expected that Ryudo wouldn't ask simple questions, she didn't expect this guy's questions to be so troublesome. Ryudo was most curious about what Kawada planned to do next. If her plan went smoothly, that is, Ryudo Kiryu rushed into the Plum Blossom Garden to kill Kawada Seiji, and then he was killed on the spot as the first stage, then what would the second stage be? The answer to this question was naturally known to Kawada Seiji. However, she couldn't easily say the answer because it involved a very long-term follow-up project. But just as Kawada Seiji was about to quickly think of a plausible hypothesis, Ryudo began to count down in a low voice, 5, 4, 3. Now the two were playing a pleasant 5-second question and answer. As the name suggested, the thinking time was only a short 5 seconds. Not to mention fabricating a reasonable lie, even filtering out the truth he knew from his mind and organizing it to speak would seem a little too rushed in this short amount of time. I can't make it up. I'll just say it. Hearing that the 3 was about to become 2 and the 2 was about to become 1, Kawada Seiji gritted her teeth and quickly replied, "Next, I'm going to use your matter as a fuse. I'm going to implement a big project called Extreme Purge Plan." Before Kawada Seiji's voice fell, Ryudo's one had just fallen. This made her feel cold sweat, as if her neck would fly to the sky at any time. What? Extreme Purge Plan? Ryudo finally stopped counting after hearing her words and continued to ask, "What do you mean? Are you going to put all the extreme doers in prison?" Yes, it's that simple. Since she had already said it, Kawada Seiji told Ryudo the plan she was going to do. In any case, things had already come to this point. There was no way Long Do could walk out of here alive. So be it. What could a dead man do if he heard it? According to Kawada Seiji's explanation, they were going to unite various departments and carry out a wave of suppression of the entire country's extreme doers in the name of Rulon Group leader Ryudo Kiryo's series of evil deeds in the Kokyo. In fact, this situation was not unimaginable to Ryudo, but he always felt puzzled. What benefits would this bring to Kawada Seiji? Even if all the extreme doers in the country were put in prison, what could they do? So Ryudo continued to ask, "Hey, you won't say that you want to maintain law and order for the country, so you want to purge us extreme doers, right? What benefits would this bring to you?" "Why not?" Whoa. Just when Kawada Seiji was about to calmly say why not, Ryudo suddenly grabbed her neck, and she couldn't breathe at all. The queen was like a fish out of water. She opened her mouth and desperately wanted to breathe, but she couldn't do it at all. It's so hard. So uncomfortable for the pampered Kawada Seiji. It was the first time she was interrogated like this in her life. For a moment, she could only wave her hand and beg for mercy, begging Ryudo to stop. A few seconds later, Ryudo loosened his grip and sneered, "Do you think I'm a fool? Your real identity is a spy-serving American. Why would you worry about law and order in this country? Ahem. Don't say it." Just now, she was almost suffocated by Ryudo's grip, and now he suddenly exposed her real identity. Kawada Seiji's mentality couldn't help but collapse. Even if she was an experienced fox spirit under this double blow of physical and mental strength, she would more or less collapse, not to mention that her life was always in the hands of others. And Ryudo continued to question, "What do you mean by don't say it? Aren't you afraid of others saying it? Why? Why do you want to capture all the extreme doers in Japan this time? Could it be that the emperor can't satisfy your needs in that aspect, so you, as the queen, want more men to serve you in turn? Bastard. Preposterous. What nonsense are you talking about?" Her mentality was already collapsing, and after being seriously insulted by Ryudo, Kawada Seiji finally couldn't help but curse. "You stinky extreme doers. Despicable things. You're as hopeless as this garbage country. When I become the prime minister, I will enact a law to hang all of you." Under extreme mental pressure, Kawada Seiji finally spilled the beans and told the most important part of her plan. Become the prime minister. Govern? Although Kawada Seiji quickly covered her mouth, Ryudo had already understood the purpose of the extreme doer cleansing plan from her words. So that's what this girl is thinking. She doesn't want to be a canary? Originally, Ryudo didn't understand why the queen would try her best to frame him and eliminate all the extreme doers in Japan. Now he understood that this girl was trying to increase her performance. As the queen, she was supposed to be trapped in the cage of the Kokyo for the rest of her life. If she said something like becoming the prime minister, it would only make people laugh. You know, in the history of this country, there has never been a precedent of the queen being in power. After all, the royal family was just a mascot. People would, at most, give face to the royal family, but they would not listen to the royal family's command. It was like people would go to the zoo to feed chimpanzees, but they would not listen to the chimpanzees. But Kawada Seiji was different from the previous queens. In addition to her biological father, she also had a godfather named Uncle Sam, and she was a very ambitious woman. With the support of her godfather, if Kawada Seiji could really promote the extreme doer cleansing plan by herself and fully implement it, she could indeed gather a lot of popularity. Although extreme doer was a very useful chamber pot for politicians, it was a very troublesome factor in the hearts of the people. Many people wanted all the extreme doers to die. Imagine the queen was angry because her brother was killed by the leader of the extreme doer, and she wanted to use all means to arrest all the extreme doers in the country. What a touching story this was. Once this matter really happened, there was no doubt that Kawada Seiji would become the most popular queen in history, and she would become a real existence admired by the people. When the time came, she would announce her divorce with the emperor and walk into the political arena with her own identity. With the support of her godfather and her own ability, she might really be able to become the prime minister. Unfortunately, although this woman's plan was very good, the only thing she shouldn't have done was to use Ryudo, the hedgehog, as a stepping stone. At this time, Kawada Seiji, who realized her slip of the tongue, broke down and asked, You know what you want to know? Can you talk about letting me go? I can arrange for you to go abroad. I promise you won't. Crack. But just as the Empress was about to fight for one last time in exasperation, she realized that her line of sight had suddenly tilted 90 degrees. At the same time, she heard the crisp sound of a neck breaking. Chapter 230. Even in her dreams, she would never have thought that she would die like this. I, the Empress, was eating hot pot and singing in my own palace. I was happily preparing to ambush someone, but in the end, my neck was broken in front of everyone. It was simply unimaginable that such a strange thing could happen in this world. Plop. As Ryudo casually tossed her forward, Kawada's body rolled down the slope of the roof of the main hall, like a ball that was kicked out. At this moment, Saito Ryudo, who was not far away, went crazy. Emperor Otoku and the Kokyo guards who were watching all of this went crazy as well. The Empress was killed in front of so many people in her own home. This was such a humiliating thing. It was like shitting on the head of the royal family. Battle of the Tongshan Dragons. With a deafening roar, Access Dao charged over like an enraged beast. Kill. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. Heavenly Emperor Wuda was also crazily shaking the chief guard's collar. asking him to kill that bastard at all costs. It had to be said that after killing Cohesion, Long Do's life had come to an end. Even with his current strength, it was impossible for him to escape in front of Ryudo and the hundreds of armed guards. Most importantly, he did not plan to escape. Therefore, the moment Ryudo rushed over, Ryudo did not hesitate to turn around and hug his body. At the same time, the 3 grenades with the safety pin pulled also made a sizzling sound. This guy is crazy. He dares, seeing Ryudo hugging him and pulling the grenades. Ryudo's face turned ashen. In an instant, the martial Dao master desperately tried to break free. However, Ryudo's strength was so strong that Ryudo had no way to break free. Hiss, hiss, boom, accompanied by an earth-shattering explosion. The roof of the main hall of the Kokyo exploded with a loud bang. The huge explosion sent the surrounding guards, who had climbed up to the roof, flying. The structure of the palace was not very stable to begin with, so the entire palace collapsed along with the explosion. The palace exploded. The empress was dead. Everything was over. What happened after that, Ryudo did not know. However, even if he used his but to think, he could imagine Emperor Otoku's face. As for Ryudo, he only knew that in his resume, other than being chopped by a sword, ejected by a blanket, hit by a car, and being hit by a rocket, he also had the glorious addition of a grenade. He was one step closer to 100 ways to die. Detected that the host is on the verge of death. Initiating emergency rescue plan by spending 1 million yen to erase the fact of death. Beep, beep, erase successful. Long Do opened his eyes and realized that he was standing in front of the entrance of the main hall that was still intact. A huge palm tree stood in the front yard of the main palace. Some guests were chatting happily under the tree. Not far away, people were coming and going in the pine room of the main palace. Some staff members were installing the equipment that would be used during the visit later. Compared to the super chaotic scene before Ryudo opened his eyes, the current Kokyo had returned to its previous lively state. It was ready to welcome the celebration ceremony at any time. So that's how it is. The backtracking point this time was before I entered the main palace and met Father John. Ryudo looked at the surrounding environment and looked at his watch. He confirmed that it was around 10:30. There was still half an hour before the princess's coming-of-age ceremony. According to the time, Father John should be preparing to walk out of the pine room and walk towards Ryudo. He would soon sacrifice himself for justice. If Ryudo continued to walk towards the main palace, then no matter what he did, there was a high chance that he would be tricked by Kobayashi. Of course, if Ryudo chose to run away now, Kobayashi wouldn't be able to trick him. But even so, it didn't count as breaking the Extreme Purge Plan. The evil deeds of the leader of the Extreme Purge Plan, Ryudo Kiryu, were one of the fuses of the Extreme Purge Plan. But it wasn't the only fuse. Even if Ryudo ran away now, Kobayashi could immediately find another Extreme Purge member to act as the fuse. This wasn't just Ryudo's problem alone. It was the problem of all the Extreme Purge members in the country. Therefore, what Ryudo needed to thwart was the entire Extreme Purge Plan. It wasn't as simple as just running away. Thinking of this, Ryudo immediately turned around and ran towards a secluded corner not far from the main palace. At the same time, he took out his mobile phone and dialed the colored glaze's number. Beep beep, beep beep. Did something happen? A second later, the colored glaze on the other side of the phone quickly picked up and asked anxiously. It was obvious that she had been paying attention to Ryudo's situation. Don't talk first, listen to me first. There are a series of troublesome things that will happen soon. Suddenly, Ryudo, who was hiding in the corner, told the colored glaze everything he knew through the phone in his hand. From Father John's invitation to Between the Plums, to the killing device in his collar, to the Emperor's plan to use it to kill Long Do and launch the Extreme Cleansing Plan as political capital for her to ascend the throne, in Ryudo's description. Half of the information was what he heard while hiding in a corner, and the other half was his conjecture. Is this really the case? After hearing Ryudo's words, the colored glaze couldn't help but frown. After all, It was too much of a coincidence that he was able to eavesdrop on such important information. But Ryudo said firmly, "This is absolutely true. They definitely didn't discover my existence, and I also checked Father John's clothes. There is indeed a killing device inside." Of course, this was 100% true. After all, Ryudo had personally experienced it not long ago. It was just that he couldn't tell the truth to the colored glaze. He could only describe it with half-truths. Although the colored glaze still felt that something was wrong, since Ryudo said so, she could only choose to believe it. Then, at this moment, the question came. In this case, how should they reverse the situation? Running away was definitely the worst way because there was no way to solve the extreme purge plan and Konoha Tenya's conspiracy. As long as Ryudo left, the officials could even say that he fled for fear of punishment, and he would still be thrown into jail. So Ryudo couldn't leave. He had to stay here and completely destroy this plan. Otherwise, there would only be endless trouble. Therefore, on the other side of the phone, the colored glaze pondered while using her slender thumb and index finger to twirl a handful of soft hair that hung down to her side. She rubbed it as if she was making a fireball. Kanzaki Colored Glaze's exclusive skill Queen's Finger. Activate. Snap. After a few seconds, with a snap of her fingers, the colored glaze opened her eyes and immediately said to Ryudo, "Didn't you say that Kojima Rinka is nearby and can help you?" "That's true, but what do we need her to do?" Since she is the section chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, it shouldn't be a problem for her to temporarily help two people hide in the Kokyo. Two people? One is me, the other is Father John, also known as Kojima-ing. He is a big trump card for us to defeat the extreme purge plan and kill Kojima-ya. Speaking of this, the colored glaze's mouth couldn't help but raise an excited smile. For the colored glaze, the most difficult part of this operation was Ryudo's special identity. As a leader of the extreme purge, such an identity had no credibility and persuasiveness. No matter how he explained, he couldn't defend himself. This was also the reason why Kojima-ya found him. Therefore, no matter what happened in between the plums, even if it was only Father John who chose to commit suicide, Kojima-ya could blame her brother's death on Ryudo. After all, Ryudo was the leader of the largest extreme purge in Yodo. This identity was destined to be the first thing that people would find when there was an incident around him. So no matter what happened, it was absolutely meaningless for Ryudo to clarify himself. He needed someone with credibility to speak for him, to help expose Kojima-ya's true identity. And this person with credibility was the president of the Great Beauty Association, Kojima-ing. If the Empress's brother personally stood out to testify, plus the Metropolitan Police Department's Search Department Chief Tashima Linwa, then this credibility was no joke. It was enough to completely throw Kojima-ya, the Empress, into the abyss. From a normal point of view, it was hard to imagine that Kojima-ing would voluntarily stand out to testify against his own sister. However, if this sister of his had installed a killing device in his collar and was prepared to drag him out as a living sacrifice, then the situation would be different. This was betrayal, and it was the kind of betrayal that stabbed a knife in the back. It was enough to send chills down one's spine, turning even the strongest love into a ruthless betrayal. Colored Glaze could imagine, when Kojima-ing knew that his sister wanted to kill him, how angry he would feel. This kind of anger was enough to drive humans to make an unexpected and fierce counterattack. So now, what Ryudo needed to do was to let the incident of Kojima-ing's death happen, and think of a way to save him. Then ask Chief Tashima to help hide Ryudo and Kojima-ing, and wait until not long after the Empress holds a press conference to announce the start of the extreme purge plan. Then let Kojima-ing appear to testify. If this combination of moves went smoothly, not only would the so-called extreme purge plan be completely ruined, but it would also consign Empress Wuda and Kojima yet to eternal damnation, with no possibility of ever making a comeback. Of course, this counterattack plan sounded simple, but the process would definitely encounter a lot of trouble. But this was the problem Ryudo had to overcome. Very good. Kojima, wash your neck and wait. Not only will I destroy your reputation, But I will also make you die even more miserably than the last time, even more ugly." After quickly discussing some details with colored glaze and hanging up the phone, Ryudo turned his head to look at among the flowers not far away. A fierce, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Then Ryudo ran towards among the flowers not far away the important person who was indispensable in this counterattack plan. The search department chief Tashima Linhua was there. Chapter 231. For Ryudo, it seemed to have been a long time ago when he saw Kojima Rihana. After all, he had just experienced a reincarnation of death. But in Rihana's view, it was only a few minutes ago that she stayed with this cute and handsome big boy. When Ryudo came to the Thousand Grass, Rihana had just changed into a new set of clothes in the lounge inside, and she walked out with righteous steps. If one only looked at the appearance of this valiant and cold-faced, capable female police officer at this time, it was probably difficult to imagine that this was actually a crazy woman who had to change her clothes not long ago. At this time, Rihana was just about to smoke a cigarette outside to relax, but she suddenly heard a voice from the grass next to her. Sister Rihana, here, here." Rihana instinctively looked over there, and she saw Ryudo's familiar golden head poking out of the grass, and he waved at her slightly. "Oh, brother Ryudo, don't tell me that you want to play with me again?" When she thought of the fierce confrontation with Ryudo in the garden jar just now, the cold expression on Rihana's face suddenly shattered. However, just as Lin Hua walked over, Long Do pulled her by the wrist and quickly hid in the bushes. They walked along a secluded corner toward the main hall. Only then did Lin Hua see that Long Do had put on a coat at some point in time, hiding his extremely conspicuous and flashy white suit. With this coat, Ryudo didn't look so conspicuous. After all, he would become a wanted criminal in a while, and he didn't dare to act so high-profile anymore. When the two quickly walked toward the main hall, Rihana reacted and asked, "Wait, Ryudo-kun, you are Sister Rihana. I received a tip-off that the woman Shawada is going to frame me in a while. Can you do me a favor?" Oh. It was the first time that Lin Hua heard Ryudo speak in a serious tone, so she immediately raised her eyebrows and entered a serious state of work. As the chief of the search section and the head of the Tenmu Group's guard department, Tokushima and Hana's personal ability and experience were naturally not for show. Ryudo's brief explanation helped her understand the current situation. Lin Hua couldn't help but sneer when he heard this. So that's how it is. That woman actually had such an idea. She's really despicable. I like it. Then, after I enter the Plum Blossom Room, I'll wait outside and arrange a place for you to hide. You just need to bring Xiao, He, and Tianing out. Lin Hua was worthy of being Iam's favorite cadre of the Chenmu group. Ryudo only briefly described the contents of the plan, and she already knew how to cooperate. Very good. I didn't ask the wrong person. That guy's out. I'll go first. See you later. For Lin Hua's active cooperation, Ryudo was naturally overjoyed. At this time, they had already arrived outside the main hall. They could see Xiao He and his two bodyguards waiting at the door from a distance. Last time, Ryudo happened to meet Xiao He and Tian-ing in the corridor inside. This time, Ryudo did not enter the main hall, so the fake priest took the initiative to run outside to wait for him. Seeing the golden-haired young man walking over, Kawada Ying's face showed a hint of joy. She smiled and reached out to Long Do. "Hello, I'm Father John of the Great Beauty Association." Nice, but before Xiao He Tianing finished speaking, Ryudo quickly reached out and put his arm around his shoulder and pointed to the two bodyguards behind him, indicating that the two guys should not come over to find trouble. "Hey? What's going on? Why is he here?" After being intimately hugged by Ryudo, the fake priest suddenly froze. Long Do hugged the fake priest and slowly led him into the main hall. At the same time, he whispered in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Xiao He Tianing, you are here on your sister's orders to invite me to the Between the Plums, right?" "Ah, yes, that's right." Hearing this, Xiao He Tianing couldn't help but swallow, and a drop of cold sweat fell from his forehead. Obviously, he didn't expect Ryudo to know his purpose in advance. It felt like he was completely seen through, and it was very bad. Seeing the nervous expression on the fake priest's face, Ryudo continued in a low voice, "Do you know what your sister is going to do this time?" "No, I don't know." Xiao He Tian-ing shook his head. He wasn't making it up, but he really didn't know. After all, he was just a chess piece that was thrown away after being used. "Your sister is going to frame me in the plum garden, and she's going to use your life as a tool to frame me." "What? You are?" The moment he heard this sentence, Xiao He Tianing instinctively wanted to shout, "What the hell are you talking about?" But Ryudo slightly grabbed his throat and stopped him from doing anything crazy in the main hall, with people coming and going. "Don't worry." Looking at Xiao He Tianing, who seemed to want to struggle up, Ryudo sneered. "Now slowly reach out and touch the high collar of your priest dress, and feel if there is anything inside." "My priest dress? High collar?" Suddenly, Xiao He Tianing frowned, then reached out his trembling hand and touched his collar. The trick that the queen did to his clothes before should be a remote-controlled killing mechanism. In the high and wide collar, there was something like a sharp piano wire hidden. As long as the mechanism was pressed, it would quickly pop out and cut the throat. Although this special device was very small and light, if he carefully touched it with his hand, it was impossible not to feel anything. After touching it for a while, Xiao Yi Tian-ing asked in disbelief, What is this? There seems to be some threads?" "That is a piano wire. When your sister presses the mechanism, these threads will quickly pop out and cut a big hole in your neck." "Huh." Hearing this, Xiao He Tianying's body suddenly trembled. A second later, he said in a trembling voice, "Impossible. My sister wouldn't do this to me." "Is that so?" Ryudo smiled and said, "Then have you thought about why your sister insisted that you wear the clothes she provided today? And there are so many servants in the Kokyo. Why did she ask you to take me to the plum garden?" "What you're saying is she wants to frame me. So when we enter the plum garden, she will activate the mechanism to kill you, and then frame me for doing all this. So there is this series of arrangements." At this time, Ryudo said in a firm tone, as if he had seen this happen with his own eyes. But even so, Xiao He Tian-ing still said angrily, "This is just your guess. I don't believe that my sister will use my life to frame you." "Is that so? Then let's make a bet." "Bet? What bet?" "You first use this to wrap your neck as a layer of protection, so that even if the mechanism pops out later, the power is not enough to kill you. Then let's go in and see if what I said is true. If it is, you have to do me a favor. It's that simple." As he said, Ryudo took out a roll of tape from his pocket, which looked similar to the color of human skin. Yes, this roll of tape was Ryudo's old friend, Hooligan Velcro. A long time ago, in the Kamishiro yard, Ryudo relied on this roll of tape to deceive the cat house and played the guardian ninja. Although this Hooligan Velcro was not a valuable item, its color and texture were similar to human skin. If it was wrapped a few more times, the toughness would be guaranteed. At least, it should not be a problem to ensure that Xiao He Tianying's throat would not be cut. After looking at the tape handed over by Ryudo, Xiao He Tian-ing said angrily, "Let it be. I don't believe that my sister wants to harm me." Humph. But even so, the fake priest still picked up the tape and wrapped it around his neck several times. He wrapped it until he almost couldn't breathe before he was willing to stop. After wrapping it from the surface, Xiao He Tianying's neck did not look different, but it was slightly thicker, but it was almost completely invisible under the high collar. "Very good, let's go in." After checking the thickness of the tape and making sure that the piano wire could not kill the fake foreigner, Ryudo quickly led them through the corridor and arrived at the familiar plum blossom room. As the two pushed the door open and walked into the queen's office, the room was still quiet. Not a sound could be heard, emitting a strange silence. The two tall and burly bodyguards had already been ordered by Xiao He and Tian-ing to wait outside. They did not follow them in, so as not to cause any trouble. When he returned to the familiar plum blossom room, the first thing Long Do saw was a familiar screen. Then he felt a burning desire to fight. It was Saito Endo. At this time, Saito Endo was hiding behind a screen next to the queen, ready to come out at any time to bring Ryudo to justice. Endo. Humph, in a while, you will know how to write the word death. Thinking of this, Ryudo raised the corner of his mouth, revealing the unique tick expression of the Dragon King. This was not because Ryudo was overconfident or looking down on others. It was mainly because he had just fought with Endo once and already had a good understanding of that guy's moves and combat system. Just like the first time he fought a boss, being chased by the boss was a very normal thing. The second time he was familiar with the boss's movement pattern and various skills, it would be much easier. Just as Ryudo was thinking about how to surprise Endo, the two had already arrived at the end of the room and saw the woman sitting on the office chair. Chapter 232. Ryudo Kiryu, we finally meet. Exactly the same as last time, Kanoya, who was sitting on the office chair, said to Ryudo calmly, as if she didn't put this young man in her eyes at all. It had to be said that her expression, that seemed to be incomparably calm in any situation, was indeed quite intimidating. Unfortunately, Ryudo had already seen the queen's appearance when she was on the verge of collapse, so this trick didn't work anymore. When he saw Kanoya last time, Ryudo was still thinking about what she would do, what she wanted to do, and what her character was like. But this time was different, because Ryudo already had a full understanding of the queen. So, the person who held the initiative now was not this stinky woman who seemed to be high above, but him. Just as Ryudo showed a fierce expression, Kanoya next to him whispered, "Sister, sister, my mission here is completed. Can I go now?" If it was in normal times, Kanoya would definitely not have such an expression when he met his sister. But now he was more or less affected by Ryudo's words just now and the strange device in his collar. His face was slightly ugly, and he looked at his sister with a trace of worry in his eyes. Please, 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 please don't be like that. In the depths of his heart that his sister couldn't see, Kanoya kept praying that Ryudo's nonsense just now wouldn't become a reality. But obviously, if praying was really useful, there wouldn't be so many tragedies in the world. So the queen replied indifferently as usual, "Indeed, your mission is over. Thank you for your hard work." Then I will, before Xiao He and Tian Ying could finish saying, "Then I'll take my leave first." The queen sitting on the office chair pressed a button on the table without hesitation. Immediately afterward, a mechanical sound of a spring contracting suddenly came from the collar of his high-collared priest suit, and a cold light ejected from the inside of the collar like lightning. It cut into the man's neck. In the previous incident, Kazuta Ei died in front of Ryudo, killed by the killing device hidden in her collar. No, it can't be. It was actually real. When she heard the strange mechanical sound from her collar, she realized that everything was real. My sister really did put this killing device in the clothes that she gave me, and planned to use my life as a weapon to frame Ryudo. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. At that moment, Kawada Young cursed in her mind in a voice that only she could hear. He couldn't accept it. He absolutely couldn't accept that his sister, who was regarded as a god, would actually treat his life like a consumable and squander it as she wished. But before Kawada Young cursed out loud, Ryudo had already quickly reached behind him, and at the same time, he slapped his neck without leaving a trace. Because of the protection of the hooligan Velcro, Kawada Young's neck was actually not cut open, so Ryudo couldn't let him continue to say anything to avoid exposing himself. After the slap, the fake priest fainted silently, and his whole body sighed weakly on the ground. At the same time, Ryudo also squeezed the hooligan blood pack that he just bought from the Krypton shopping mall on the neck, creating the illusion of blood splashing everywhere. It had to be said that Ryudo's current speed was really fast. At least in Kawada Young's eyes, her brother's neck was cut open by the killing device and blood splashed everywhere. Clap, 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 clap. After finishing his preparations, Ryukyu pretended to check on Xiao He Tian Ying's breathing. He pretended to frown, then stood up and applauded. Beautiful. Is this the style of the current empress? To think that he could even kill his own kin without any hesitation. What an eye-opener. To achieve great things, there are always some sacrifices. Not to mention, the person who killed my brother is you. You have to pay a heavy price for this. Is that so? Then let me see how serious the price is. In the next second, Long Do's body was like a ferocious beast. He flew over the desk in front of him and punched in the direction of the Empress. However, almost at the same time that Long Do released his killing intent, a short figure flew out from behind a screen to the side with a whoosh. He faced Long Do's punch head-on. This short person who suddenly rushed out from the side was naturally Saito Ryudo, and the posture, strength, and angle of his punch towards Ryudo were almost the same as the previous time. Stinky brat, want to kill the master? Not a chance. When he punched towards Ryudo's punch, Saito Ryudo's eyes flashed with a murderous light, and his fist also blasted out with a fierce momentum. Saito Ryudo's fist technique mainly came from the Saito Ryudo system of the Saito Ryudo system, and this was the same as Saito Takahiro and Saito Dunya. However, because he had high attainments in both Vajra Finger of Tantra and Tantra Qigong, the quality of his fist was much higher than the average person, unless it was a monster like Ryudo. No one was worthy to exchange blows with him. However, was Ryudo really going to exchange blows with Saito Ryudo? A second before the fist that seemed to be aimed at Kawada was about to collide with the Tao-reaching realm, Ryudo's fist turned into a claw in a seemingly abrupt, but actually very smooth movement. He grabbed Saito Ryudo's wrist. How is this possible? This sudden change gave Saito Ryudo a fright, and even made him feel a rare sense of fear. It was impossible. Even for a martial Tao master who had entered the Tao, it was impossible to change the fist into a claw when the fist was already in motion. Unless Ryudo did not intend to punch from the beginning, and he was going to grab Saito Ryudo's wrist with his claw. Of course, this was actually the case. Ryudo already knew that Saito Ryudo would block this punch, so he naturally would not continue to exchange blows with this guy like an idiot. Instead, he was already prepared to change the moment he punched. Therefore, in the next moment, Ryudo's palm flashed with an unfathomable shadow, and almost brushed past Saito Ryudo's fist, and clamped down on Saito Ryudo's thick short hand like an iron clamp. Bone-twisting dragon hand. Reverse heaven and earth. After grabbing Saito Ryudo's fist, Ryudo quickly fixed Saito Ryudo's wrist that was supposed to continue moving forward, and cleverly twisted the force of the punch in a spiral shape to the side. Bang! Crack! Because everything happened too quickly, Saito Ryudo could not stop his full force punch, and only heard a crisp crack. Almost all the force of the punch was applied to that arm. It even caused the joint to break. The moment Saito Ryudo reacted, he quickly shook off Ryudo's hand that was grabbing his wrist, and quickly somersaulted to the back to increase the distance between them. When his body, which was much heavier than it looked, landed heavily on the ground, and barely managed to maintain his balance, Saito Ryudo's face showed a rare trace of seriousness and disbelief. After all, as long as one had eyes, it would not be difficult to see that Saito Ryudo's right arm that had just punched out was now hanging limply like a noodle, and the wrist and elbow joints were visibly distorted. After a moment, Saito Ryudo gritted his teeth and said, "What an exquisite little grappling technique. I have to say, I underestimated you." Saito Ryudo himself was a master of the grappling system, so he could naturally see that Ryudo's bone-twisting dragon hand, reverse heaven and earth, move just now contained a lot of profound skill. At the same time when the enemy was punching, Saito Ryudo grabbed the enemy's wrist, and by rotating and shifting the force of the punch, dislocated the enemy's hand joints. This situation was very similar to when someone suddenly slipped on a banana peel while walking. The force of the step that was supposed to be downward was shifted to the side, and the situation was very similar to when someone sprained their ankle. However, the damage caused by bone-twisting dragon hand, reverse heaven and earth, was naturally much more serious than a sprain caused by a slip. Even Saito Ryudo, who was caught off guard, suffered greatly. This time, the twisted wrist and elbow joints were at least several times more serious than the wrist dislocated by Ryudo last time, especially the twisted elbow joints. It was very difficult to reattach it by oneself, and even Saito Ryudo did not have absolute confidence in doing so. In other words, Saito Ryudo would definitely not be able to use his arm for a short period of time, and this was only the result of Ryudo's grab. The power of bone-twisting dragon hand was evident. From the beginning, bone-twisting dragon hand was a branch of ancient martial art system, and tendon-dislocating dragon hand could also be bought in the shop. When the two systems were combined, it was the tendon-dislocating dragon hand that was commonly seen in wuxia novels. Tendon-dislocating dragon hand could cause all kinds of pain to achieve the effect of torture, while bone-twisting dragon hand could cause dislocation of the enemy's joints, causing a sharp decrease in combat power. In order to pursue the ultimate combat power, Ryudo chose bone-twisting dragon hand to cultivate, and it was indeed quite effective, allowing Saito Ryudo to enjoy it. Now that Saito Ryudo had one of his arms broken, his combat power was greatly reduced, so he glared angrily at Ryudo, and without turning his head, he said to Kawadiya, "Hurry up and call for backup. I may not be able to subdue him now." Saito Ryudo wanted to say, "I may not be able to subdue him now," but he did not expect that before he could finish. A flash grenade with the fuse pulled was already flying in his direction. Flash grenade? Wait a minute? Where did this guy pull it out from? Magic. In an instant, Saito Ryudo pulled Kawadiya back as fast as he could and rushed out of the secret door. And then a familiar explosion and flash came from between the plum trees. The explosion of the flash grenade was so loud that it directly alarmed all the guards and guests near the main hall not far away. However, just a few seconds later, a group of armed guards rushed into between the plum trees with messy footsteps, only to see the furious Saito Ryudo and the confused queen standing there. Other than the two of them, Ryudo, who was supposed to be here, and Kawadiya, who was lying on the ground, had already disappeared, as if they had turned into smoke. Chapter 233. He slipped away. Ryudo Kiryu, that bastard, actually slipped away. When Saito hurriedly dodged the flash bomb and rushed back to between the plum blossoms, he saw that there was nothing inside. His face was filled with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Anger was anger. This guy just left like that, treating him like air. Humiliation was humiliation. His hand was still dangling, and he couldn't move for a while. Before this, Saito didn't even dream that Ryudo, that bastard, could be so terrifying. The moment they clashed, Seida's arm was crippled. The most terrifying thing was that during the clash, just now, Saito could clearly feel that there were signs of hidden force in that twist. In the realm of Chi, it wasn't difficult to cultivate obvious force, but hidden force was a technique that only masters could master. After mastering hidden force, one could release their force from all kinds of strange angles. The bone-twisting dragon hand, reverse heaven and earth, just now was obviously the culmination of hidden force. Impossible. There must be something wrong with my senses. How could that kid have mastered hidden force in just a week's time? Did I see a ghost? Saito was 100% sure that Ryudo was just a kid who didn't even have chi a week ago. If he said that he could cross the realm of obvious strength and reach covert strength in a week, it would be the most ridiculous thing in the world. However, compared to the shock of Saito, Kawada, who returned to between the plum blossoms, couldn't help but frown. What's going on? Ryudo, that bastard, took away Kazuto's body? Why did he do that? Looking at the bloodstains that almost seeped into the floor, Kawada was really puzzled. Logically speaking, Kawada Kazuto, who had his throat slit, should be a dead person. So what if Ryudo took his body away? Was he planning to save it? Did that idiot think that without the body, we wouldn't be able to convict him? Was his brain damaged? Thinking of this, the Empress sighed slightly and quickly ordered the guards who had rushed over. The criminal Ryudo Kiryu is currently on the run. Passed down the order that he must not be allowed to escape from the Kokyo. Yes, just like that, under the Queen's order, all the guards who were supposed to be guards began to search for the prisoners around the Imperial Palace quickly. Ryudo Kiryu couldn't go far. After all, this was the Kokyo. What's more, he was carrying a dead person like Xiao, He, and Tianning. Unless they grew wings, it was impossible for them to fly out. At the same time, the news that Between the Plums was attacked, and that something had happened to the Empress quickly spread throughout Between the Thousand Grasses. At the same time, there was also the news that the princess's coming-of-age ceremony was cancelled. After hearing this news, the group of guests who had gathered and chatted happily at Among a Thousand Grasses immediately went into an uproar. It can't be? Someone actually tried to assassinate the Empress here? Although the Empress seems to be fine, I heard that someone else died. This is not a small matter. Was it Ryudo Kiryu who did it? I was just saying that something would definitely happen if we called an extreme leader over. Isn't it here now? Although an unexpected crime had happened at the Imperial Palace, the guests gathered at Among a Thousand Grasses didn't panic at all. They even commented on the situation there while chatting and laughing. On one hand, there were no ear-piercing alarms now. On the other hand, a large number of guards had been added to Among a Thousand Grasses to prevent Ryudo from coming here and disturbing the guests so that they could relax and tease him. In addition, the royal family was going to hold a press conference to explain this matter and inform them in advance that there was going to be an important announcement. As a result, most of the guests from Yatsuki didn't plan to leave. Instead, they were prepared to watch another big show here. In a corner of Among a Thousand Grasses, a woman who looked a little naturally naive shook her head and said, "Aya, how scary. I didn't expect a young man to do something like this." This woman, who seemed a little naturally naive, was the hostess Ryudo had met at the Tsukujiri Villa before Tsukujiri Shinkodo. Since Union's father, Kyoji, was usually busy with work and also had to deal with research and development issues, Shinkodo was usually in charge of attending such social events. Currently, in Among a Thousand Grasses, sitting next to Shinkodo, was her old friend of many years, Ruehue Kamishiro. However, compared to Shinkodo, who was so naturally naive that she had forgotten that she had met Ryudo before, Ruehue's expression was much more serious. How troublesome. The current situation was far more complicated than she had originally expected. She hoped that Colored Glaze and Ryudo would be able to handle this properly. Ruehue sat on a chair and chatted with Shinkodo while secretly picking up her cell phone again and reading a message that her daughter had sent her. In that message, Colored Glaze roughly explained Ryudo's current situation, as well as what they planned to do next, telling her mother not to panic. Of course, Ruehue wouldn't panic in the first place. She would only worry for Ryudo. Right now, the entire Kokyo was in chaos. Thousands of guards swiftly rushed over from outside and surrounded this place, searching for traces of the villain who dared to assassinate the Empress. In that case, just where were Ryudo, Kawa, and Tian-ing hiding at this time? Before saying that, it was necessary to mention the specific structure of the Kokyo. The main hall, Among a Thousand Grasses, and other places that Ryudo and the others had stayed in were all in the new palace area. This was the area that had been rebuilt after being bombed during World War II. However, to the south of the new palace, after passing through the Dogwo in the water area of the Kokyo, one could see an even older building called the Three Halls in the palace. The so-called Three Halls in the palace referred to the Virtuous Place, Imperial Spirit Hall, and Temple as a collective name for these three groups of buildings. They were the places of worship in the palace and were definitely not open to outsiders. Only the imperial family could use them. The Virtuous Place worshipped the Amaterasu, great god. At the same time, it worshipped one of the three divine artifacts of the emperor, the Yada no Kagami. The Imperial Spirit Hall worshipped the memorial tablets of the previous emperors and the imperial family. The temple mainly worshipped the gods of heaven and earth in the Shinto religion. As for the current Ryudo, he had already escaped into the heavily guarded Three Halls in the palace with the help of Sister Linhua. However, despite having such a grand name and background, the so-called Three Halls were in fact just three slightly larger buildings in the Heian era style. Entering the quiet, virtuous place was like entering a somewhat narrow temple. At the end of the hall, there was a huge Amaterasu, great god statue, and in front of the statue, there was a mirror. Now Ryudo, Linhua, and the unconscious Kohishinin were hiding behind the Amaterasu great god statue. Sister Linhua, you're really something. I keep having the feeling that this damned place is your territory. When the three of them were hiding here, Ryudo looked at the quaint and sacred interior decoration around him and could not help but give Linhua a thumbs up. Logically speaking, the three halls in the palace was an important place for the imperial family and the Shinto religion. The security around it was so tight that even a fly would find it difficult to break in. However, when Linhua quickly brought Ryudo, who had rushed out of the plum blossom room along a small path, the guard in charge of guarding the east gate acted as if he did not see anything and directly let the three of them in. He, sister, is the chief of the search section 1. This little thing is nothing. After hearing Ryudo's flattery, Linhua flipped her hair handsomely and showed an extremely complacent expression. Of course, this sentence was completely nonsense. Not to mention the chief of the search section 1, even the director of the Metropolitan Police Department could not order the guards of the three halls in the palace to quietly let them in. The reason why Linhua could do this was mainly because of her identity as the chief of the Heavenly Eye Group. It was obvious that the Heavenly Eye Group had placed all kinds of chess pieces in various positions since a long time ago. Even the three halls of the palace had their moles, and their sphere of influence could be described as scattered all over the place. Ryudo was naturally well aware of this situation, but he would not be stupid enough to point it out. Linhua knew that Ryudo did not know her identity, so she wanted to hide it and use him. Ryudo knew that Linhua did not know that he knew her identity, so she wanted to hide it and use him. The two originally had a relationship of using each other. In this case, they had reached a subtle balance. Anyway, they could use each other as much as they could. Whether they would be enemies in the future, they would talk about it when the time came. Just as Ryudo and Linhua were hiding behind the Amaterasu god statue and chatting, Kabata Young, who had been knocked unconscious before, finally woke up slowly. What exactly am I after waking up? Kawada Young's eyes were unfocused, and his face was pale. He first reached out and touched his neck. After touching the several layers of hooligan Velcro that had been cut by the sharp piano string, he put down his hand in a daze. Just now, this man seemed to have a nightmare. In the nightmare, his sister, who he had always regarded as a god, wanted to use his life to achieve her own goals. In the dream, Kabata Young crazily shouted at his sister, "Sister, am I really just a tool to you? The kind that can be abandoned at will?" But in the dream, the woman who grew up with him, who always seemed to be indifferent and calm, just glanced at his brother coldly and did not answer anything. It was true, all of it was true. After waking up, Kabata Young took a deep breath, and the expression in his eyes slowly changed from decadence to anger. Before this, Kabata Young's feelings for his sister could be said to be very adoring, the kind that he could die for her. But when he found out that he was betrayed by the person he loved, the stronger the adoration, the stronger the anger and hatred. So he looked at Ryudo and said in a tone full of resentment, "How do you want me to cooperate with you? Say it, as long as you can kill that woman. I am willing to do anything." Chapter 234. Broken. Kawada Young was completely broken. After he found out that he was heartlessly abandoned by his sister, something in his heart seemed to have cracked, and he no longer had time to care about other things. The glory of the Kawada family, the future of the Great Beauty Association, the condition of his son who was still lying in the hospital, etc. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. He just wanted the woman to die. He just wanted the woman to taste the unforgettable pain of betrayal that she gave to his brother. It was that simple. Very good. That's more like it. After feeling the resentment of the fake priest, Ryudo smiled and patted him on the shoulder. Then he looked at the time on his phone. According to the time on the phone, it was less than half an hour before 12 o'clock, and the press conference held by the royal family would officially begin at 12 o'clock. For this unprecedented press conference, the royal family had been preparing for a long time. When Ryudo entered the main palace, he saw a large group of staff and media equipment, which was actually prepared for this press conference. Of course, this press conference itself was not to explain the Queen assassination not long ago. It was originally held for this princess coming-of-age ceremony. Or, on the surface, it was held for this princess coming-of-age ceremony. In fact, until now, not many people remembered that they gathered in the Kokyo to watch the princess coming-of-age ceremony. Everyone's attention had been attracted by the words Ryudo Kiryo. That's right, it was Ryudo Kiryo, or rather, it was Ryudo Kiryo again. In fact, not long ago, when Ryudo walked into the Kokyo arrogantly, the discussion about him had already exploded in Yodo. The reports of the frontline reporters spread to every place through the internet, TV, radio, and other media as fast as possible. At the same time, the classic photo of Ryudo standing in front of the Kokyo and giving the middle finger appeared. Some people said that he was arrogant and dared to give the middle finger in front of the Kokyo. Some people said that he was unfilial and had dared to do such a thing without manners. He should be sentenced. Some people said that he was very handsome and even hoped that he could become an idol on the spot and become a handsome man. Just like that, on the internet, news and posts related to Ryudo Kiryo increased by hundreds of thousands in just 1 or 2 hours. The speed at which it spread was comparable to a virus. For a time, the entire Tokyo was in turmoil. Almost everyone knew about this man, the leader of the second generation of the extreme Tao sect, and the unique tags on him: domineering, rebellious, cold, tough guy, and so on. These were all the labels that Ryudo carried around. Although people had different opinions on Ryudo's actions and attitude, there was one thing that everyone agreed on. This young man was indeed very capable. Even those who hated him had to admit this. After all, it was unprecedented for a 16-year-old high school student to be invited by the royal family to attend the princess's coming-of-age ceremony as a leader of a gang. In the past many years, the concept of extreme Tao had always been widely known by people, but the concept of extreme Tao had always been widely known. However, most people also thought that extreme Tao was just a group of bugs that hid in the sewers and couldn't see the light of day. However, Ryudo's appearance seemed to have broken the situation. For the first time, people realized that extreme Tao could be so young, so handsome, and so openly stand on the stage that only the upper class could go to. Especially in his Dori First High School, almost the entire school was crazily discussing him that morning. The First High BBS was also crazily flooded with posts related to Ryudo. A second-year high school girl posted on the forum, "God, this is the first time I feel that young Master Ryudo is so handsome. My heart is about to be stolen by him." Under this post, there was a picture of Ryudo swaggering outside the Kokyo. In the picture, Long-do was wearing a flashy and handsome outfit with a pair of sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. His domineering aura, heroic aura, handsome aura, and flirtatious aura were fully displayed. It had to be said that even in the context of the entire society, the current Ryudo could be regarded as a very attractive man. Not to mention, in a mere high school campus, he was simply at the level of Yao Ming. If it was before, this girl would probably be bombarded by the group of determined anti-Ryudo supporters on the First High BBS. But now, the situation had obviously reversed 180 degrees. Yeah, young Master Ryudo is really handsome. I really want to be his girlfriend. He's really too handsome, and his temperament is mature. Compared to the group of boys in our school, they can't even compare to a single strand of his hair. Yes, after seeing this picture, I immediately broke up with my boyfriend. Ryudo Kiryo, I want to fence with you until dawn. Although there seemed to be some strange guy mixed in with the crowd, it was enough to show how popular Battle Dragon's popularity was at the moment. Of course, in these posts that were in love with Ryudo, there were also some determined anti-Ryudo supporters. As usual, there were all kinds of sarcastic comments in the post. For example, no way, someone really likes that guy, a group of superficial idiots, what's so good about that extreme hooligan? Didn't that bastard Ryudo have one foot in two boats before? You can't have forgotten so quickly, right? Ever since Longdo was involved in a scandal with senior sister Yunyen and Miss Yuli, there had been a group of people tirelessly scolding him on the first high school forum. But today was different from the past. As soon as this group of anti-Ryudo supporters appeared, they were chased and scolded by Ryudo supporters for 9 streets. In the end, they could only delete the post and go offline, hiding in the toilet for warmth. Just as this huge storm, named Ryudo Kiryo, swept through the entire Tokyo, the time gradually approached noon, and the opening of the press conference was getting closer and closer. At this time, Kawada and her husband, Emperor Itoku, were waiting in the lounge next to the main hall, and their daughter, Princess Fukudaheim, had already been sent back to the residence to quietly finish her coming-of-age ceremony. And this Emperor Itoku, who was going to speak at the press conference, Kawada sat on the sofa without saying a word, and her face was a bit gloomy. Suddenly, Emperor Itoku also walked over to his wife and comforted her. "Yeah, don't be too sad. The dead can't come back to life." After all, his wife's brother, Kawada Inkai, unfortunately died, and everyone thought that the emperor's bad mood was caused by her brother's death. Kawada nodded slightly and reluctantly responded to her husband with a few words, and pretended to be sad because of her brother's death. But as the murderer of her brother, how could Kawada Inkai be sad because of that guy's death? She still felt that something was not right. From the time Ryudo escaped from the plum garden, it had been almost an hour, but the guards and police still couldn't find him in the Kokyo. Ryudo Kiryo, that stinky brat, seemed to have disappeared into thin air, and no one found their whereabouts. This situation always made Kawada Inkai feel uneasy. In the original plan, Ryudo should be killed on the spot in the plum garden, but not only did he not die, but he also successfully escaped with Kawada Inkai's body. This was far beyond the scope of Kawada Inkai's plan. But it doesn't matter. As long as this press conference is over, my extreme cleansing plan can be implemented. Then even if Ryudo escapes from the Kokyo, what awaits him is only endless pursuit. Don't worry, although there were some small mistakes, there was no change in the overall direction. Thinking of this, Kawada Inkai took a deep breath and tried to calm her mood. Not long after, as the reporters walked into the main hall with excited expressions, this highly anticipated press conference was finally about to begin. For the reporters, today was really a very joyful day. Originally, they came for the princess coming-of-age ceremony, a traditional royal celebration, but in fact, a mere coming-of-age ceremony was actually not that exciting, at least not qualified to become explosive news. But at around 11 o'clock, when the princess coming-of-age ceremony was about to begin, explosive news unexpectedly appeared. Although no one knew what happened so far, most of the reporters had already heard the news. It was that the leader of the extreme path, Ryudo Kiryo, who was reported to have come to participate in the ceremony, seemed to have committed an unforgivable crime. Extreme path leader, princess coming-of-age ceremony. Inside the Kokyo, unforgivable crime. When all these keywords were combined, the sensational effect was needless to say. The bosses of the TV stations, newspapers, and websites would be laughing in their dreams tonight. So just 5 minutes before this unprecedented press conference began, the main hall, Pine Room, was already crowded with people, and everyone anxiously stared at the long table placed not far away. Oh, it's coming. Accompanied by the sound of the bell at 12 o'clock, under the excited gaze of the reporters, the members of the royal family represented by the emperor, the empress, several cabinet members, and the chief of police, Sensible Daigo. That's right, the chief of police, Sensible Daigo, the father of Ryudo's right-hand man, Sensible Garo. Chapter 235. Sensible's family had been engaged in the police profession since the Meiji era. It could be said that they were loyal. There were dozens of ancestors who died in the line of duty. Compared to Wulong, the cyber network detective, Daigo Mingji perfectly matched the outsider's understanding of the Mingji family. He had a head full of white hair, a strong face, and eyes like torches. He was wearing a neat police officer uniform, giving people a very strict and meticulous feeling. Police chief was the highest position among the 9 levels of the police. The head of the Metropolitan Police Department was not as simple as the title, but it also represented the highest level of the Japanese police. It could be called the first brother of the police. When Sensible sat at the edge of a long table, his face was obviously a bit serious. His eyes didn't look straight ahead, as if he was thinking about something. Something's not right. Something's not right with this press conference. With Sensible's identity, he naturally already knew the inside information of the Queen's assassination incident before the press conference. From the situation he learned, this time, after the leader of Extreme Do, Ryudo Kiryu, entered the Kokyo, he tried to assassinate the current queen, Kabato Masa, but he accidentally caused the death of the queen's brother, Kabato Masa. It could be said that this incident was the worst incident that had happened in the past 10 years, but in Sensible's view, there were doubts everywhere in this incident. First of all, how did Ryudo Kiryu get the royal family's hospitality to come to this princess's coming-of-age ceremony? Second, why did he bring Kabato Masa into Plum Blossom? And there were no guards around? Finally, how did the young man who was only in his teens manage to evacuate from the Kokyo openly after the failed assassination of the queen? At least with Sensible's many years of experience and eyesight as a police officer, this incident could be said to be full of flaws. But he couldn't express his opinion on this. Even if Sensible was the first brother of the police and had been a police officer for generations, he also had to abide by the basic rules of the game in the circle. Especially when it involved the royal family, many things could not be considered from a legal point of view. Instead, it involved some very complicated things. Sensible Dao was naturally very displeased with this kind of working environment. After all, the Sensible family had been policemen for generations. They still had some self-persistence and rules in their hearts. They were not the same type as those policemen who colluded with the rich and powerful. But in this case, if there was no evidence to prove that the Empress was lying, he could only pretend to be an ostrich, turning a blind eye and pretending that he didn't see anything. Phew. What a boring press conference. Let's end it quickly. So when Dao sat at the edge of the long table and glanced at the emperor and his wife sitting in the middle of the long table, he couldn't help but sigh. At this time, long tables were lined up in a row in the Pine Room. Kohishina sat in the middle of the table in a domineering manner, and then her husband, Emperor Wuda, and the other members of the royal family sat on her left and right, looking very imposing. Pa, pa pa, pa pa pa. When all the masters were in position this time, the first thing that flashed toward them was a blinding light. It was as if a large pile of fireworks had exploded in front of everyone's eyes. It was so bright that even Kawada's eyes were a little dazzled. These reporters are so annoying. First, she reached out and rubbed her eyes. Then the Empress's nose was sour, and a burst of tears that seemed to be full of affection slowly flowed out from her eyes. She slowly moved the microphone closer to her and said in a heavy tone, "Dear reporter friends and distinguished guests, I gathered you together today to announce a sad news." It had to be said that Kohishina was a natural actress. When she said these words, this woman completely put herself in the role of a poor empress who lost her brother and was assassinated. Therefore, those who heard those words were heartbroken, and those who saw them shed tears. The entire pine forest was filled with a sorrowful atmosphere. Seeing that the atmosphere had been stirred up, the Empress continued slowly. Just an hour ago, a murderer broke into the Pine Room and tried to assassinate me. Thanks to my brother, who risked his life to save me, I was safe and sound. But Inghe unfortunately passed away. Suddenly, Kohishina lowered her head in pain, and when she said the last few words, she even burst into tears and choked silently, fully showing the Empress's acting skills. Click, 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 click. After seeing her sorrowful look, the reporters below also raised their cameras and started snapping photos. Many people have even thought of the title of this report, such as, "The Empress Lost Her Brother. She washed her face with tears at the press conference." Bang! Immediately afterward, the Empress slammed the table, and the expression on her face quickly changed from grief to anger. Why? Why did this happen? At the beginning, we decided to invite the most famous leader of Extreme Do, Ryudo Kiryu, to come over, hoping to inspire him and let the group of Extreme Do turn over a new leaf. Kohishanya suddenly raised her head and then said, "But what did the leader of the Rulong group do? He laughed at our persuasion and even attacked me. It's simply heartless." Woo, woo. How can it be so outrageous? After hearing Kohishyanya's righteous words, the group of reporters below couldn't help but start an uproar. It's too much, that Ryudo Kiryu. The royal family has already given them a chance to turn over a new leaf, and they didn't accept it, but they still want to attack. Extreme Do is Extreme Do. Mud can't help a wall. It's better to arrest them all and send them to prison. For a time, the reporters couldn't help whispering, and their words were full of anger toward Ryudo Kiryu and the Extreme Do group. However, when he noticed this change, Sensible, who was sitting at the long table, couldn't help but frown. The Empress is mobilizing the reporters' resentment and dissatisfaction toward Extreme Do? What's going on? What does she want to do? As the police chief, Sensible naturally has a certain degree of understanding of the Rulong Group, the largest Extreme Do organization in Yodo. In fact, from Daw's point of view, the Rulong Group was not a very bad organization. They were not involved in anesthetics, smuggling, or gambling. It could be said that they were already a clear stream in the Kyudo. In fact, in the area managed by the Rulong Group, the crime rate was actually quite low. The surrounding people's evaluation of them was also okay. They were not the kind of evil people. Instead, they had some of the chivalrous demeanor of the Edo period. But now the Empress Owada seemed to want to target the Rulong Group and their leader Ryudo Kiryu. And it was for a reason that Sensible thought was ridiculous. The royal family summoned the leader of Extreme due to the Kokyo to inspire them? To make them turn over a new leaf? Bullshit. Even if they want to do this kind of thing, it's definitely not the royal family's turn to do it. What qualifications do they have to intervene in Extreme Do? This is clearly the work of the Metropolitan Police Department. Okay? What's more, the whole Empress assassination incident was full of doubts. Sensible already felt that there was something wrong with it. At this time, after watching the Empress performance, he felt that this woman was talking nonsense. If it weren't for the press conference now, Sensible definitely couldn't help but stand up and yell at the Empress. Is this something you should care about? Where do you put the police? Aren't you overstepping your authority? But not now. At least before there is an obvious turnaround, Sensible couldn't do anything. He could only sit quietly at the long table and watch the Empress' tearful performance. At this moment, the Empress had already reached the most critical part. I think. Owada suddenly stood up from the chair and said in a bold tone, "This country can't go on like this. We must not let the Extreme do whatever they want. We should do a national purge and put all the Extreme Do in prison." A nationwide purge? Wasn't this a little too? After hearing the Empress' words, there was an uproar in the group of reporters below. The number of Extreme Do in the entire country added up to at least 150,000 people. And now, the number of people imprisoned in the country's prisons was about 50,000. If all the Extreme Do were to be purged and put all of them in prison, then the number of people imprisoned in the country's prisons would instantly skyrocket by 3 times. What is the concept of 3 times? The prison that originally accommodated 50,000 people, if 150,000 people suddenly flooded in, wouldn't the prisons in the country burst? What's more, such a huge project can't be done easily. At least Sensible couldn't help but cover his head when he heard the plan. Nonsense. This woman was simply fooling around. What exactly was she thinking? Although Daigo Mingji thought so, as Xiao He and Tianya explained their plan, his brows furrowed more and more. In Owada's plan, the imperial family will be responsible for contacting many international security companies and prison companies to assist in the plan. Within a year, these companies will invest about $100 billion in Nippon and build more than 200 private prisons to imprison the arrested Extreme Do members. At the same time, the arrest work will be completed by the largest security companies in America. What is the concept of the security companies in America? That was a big shot who had fought in the Middle East and fought with terrorists. His employees numbered in the hundreds of thousands. And in this plan, there are dozens of domestic companies that support the imperial family. And they are all reputable companies in various industries. If what Owada said is true, she can mobilize so many domestic and foreign forces to carry out this plan. Then this extreme do purge plan really seems possible. Chapter 236. At first glance, Kamado-ya's extreme Tao cleansing plan sounded very illogical and childish. As Dao knew, there were at least 100,000 extreme Taos in the country. Even if they were convicted using various methods, there wouldn't be enough police force to arrest them, nor would there be enough prison resources to manage them. But Kamado-ya had obviously thought of this. Her solution was to cooperate with the government through various domestic and foreign companies to form an extreme Tao cleansing alliance. Although it was relatively rare in Japan, in Europe and the United States, private prisons and various large security companies had long been very mature businesses. Everything was legal and compliant. At this time, Kamado-ya planned to bring in the American companies through the government and let them be responsible for arresting extreme Taos in the country. They would also build prisons and maintain the prison environment. In this way, these large foreign companies could earn large amounts of USD, and the country could also completely get rid of the extreme Taos. Wasn't it killing two birds with one stone? After listening to Kanwada-ya's plan, Daigo Tamizu only felt a chill rising from his back and slowly spreading to his whole body. Indeed, on the surface, this cooperation plan perfectly solved the extreme Taos problem, and the Japanese government didn't need to provide money or manpower. They just needed to nod their heads. But in the eyes of Daigo Mingji, this was a complete plan to lead the wolf into the house. Large American companies, especially private prisons, were the ultimate profiteering business. On one hand, they provided convenience to prisoners in prison. As long as they were willing to pay, they could have all the benefits that prisoners didn't deserve. On the other hand, they used extremely low labor costs to obtain orders from large production companies and let the prisoners in prison work overtime to complete the orders. In other words, these private prisons looked like prisons, but they were actually factories. The workers inside were the kind of free labor that didn't need to be paid. Therefore, if Kamado-ya's plan was implemented, then the result would be hundreds of thousands of extreme Taos in the country would be caught in these private prisons for various reasons and be crazily exploited with more than 16 hours of work per day. Those American companies had more than 100,000 free laborers who did not need to be paid. They could produce whatever they wanted, and at the same time, they could get a large commission from the government. It was a huge profit. This was not the scariest part. The scariest part was that once such a private prison was established, the next step would be to collude with the judicial system and throw a large number of people into prison. For example, the American population accounted for less than 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners were held in the country. This was not a matter of whether public security was good or bad, but when these private prisons rose, the more prisoners there were, the more the bosses behind them would earn. Naturally, they would want to throw more people into prison. This was just a business. At the same time, as the promoter of the extreme cleansing plan, Kawada herself would also benefit greatly. That was the resume and popularity of planning an unprecedented project and putting it into practice. After this, she would immediately become the most famous and popular empress in history. No matter what she wanted to do, she would have the right to speak. Since he and Tianya were able to easily reach an agreement with the American corporation since they were young, Dao Mingji already had a rough idea of what kind of evil water was coming out of the empress's stomach. Coupled with the extremely dirty situation behind the scenes, as the police chief, he absolutely did not want to see this happen in his country. Therefore, just after Kawadia announced the contents of her extreme cleansing plan, the police chief could not help but grit his teeth and decided to take the risk and directly stand up. Puffed. Ha 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 ha. But before Sensible stood up, a burst of wild laughter came from the ceiling above the pine room, which immediately attracted everyone's attention. Huh? This laughter. Could it be? Kawadia, who was about to give a few more impassioned speeches, suddenly widened her eyes and looked up with an expression of disbelief. The pine room was the central area of the main hall. Although the decoration inside the hall could not be said to be splendid, it still had the flavor of the era. The surrounding walls were decorated with purple and red satin, with dragon patterns. There were tassel-like satin curtains hanging from above, like a young girl's swaying skirt. But just when everyone looked up at the direction of the laughter, they saw a figure quickly leaping from the tasseled satin curtains under the ceiling. Then, like a crane, he gracefully landed in front of the long table where the royal family members were sitting. According to the description of a reporter who was fortunate enough to see this scene at close range, the situation at that time was like this. How should I describe that feeling? It was like Zorro. Do you know Zorro? Young Master Ryudo descended from the sky, like the hero thief Zorro, and directly landed in front of the royal family members. Moreover, his landing was light and silent, and his movements were extremely elegant. At that time, we were all stunned. The scene was very quiet, and no one dared to make a sound. After all, everyone was attracted by young Master Ryudo's gorgeous figure and handsome movements. They could not help but have the thought of, this person is too awesome in their hearts. Speaking of which, I'm not afraid of you laughing at me. If there were not so many people at that time, I really wanted to go over and kowtow to young Master Ryudo 3 times. What god, what royal family, in front of that young master, they are simply a joke. They are not even comparable to dog farts. Although this reporter's description was his own opinion, it could be seen that Ryudo's shocking fall had an exaggerated impact. Other than the reporter, even the surrounding policemen and guards were stunned by him. They were stunned for a full 2 seconds before reacting. After reacting, a high-ranking member of the Metropolitan Police Department immediately shouted out instinctively, It's Ryudo Kiryu. Quick, catch him." Suddenly, the surrounding policemen and guards rushed towards him as if they suddenly realized something. They wanted to catch this young criminal who had barged into the royal family's press conference on the spot. At that moment, at least a dozen strong men in police or guard uniforms rushed towards Ryudo, trying to capture him alive. But under the cameras of the reporters, who were frantically taking pictures of this rare event, the young man only slowly raised his right foot. When Ryudo raised his right foot and raised it to a height higher than his left knee, his left foot was still standing straight in the same place. His body did not sway at all, as if it was deeply rooted in the ground. Following that, Ryudo made a very ordinary move. He raised his right foot and stomped it down. Stomping one's foot was an action that even a few years old girl could easily do. It was hard to imagine that such an action could cause anyone to feel uncomfortable. However, the moment Ryudo's tremor kick from the ancient Bajiquan landed, it made everyone present fully understand how powerful such a simple action could be. Boom! Gotcha! When the right foot that seemed to weigh at most a few dozen pounds landed, the first thing that came out was a rumbling sound like an earthquake, followed by the sound of the huge and heavy bluestone floor shattering like glass. Like a storm of air mixed with the broken pieces of the floor, the sound of the explosion, the air wave, and the momentum like Mountai spread out with Ryudo as the core. At that moment, everyone seemed to see the image of a 100-meter-tall Vajra statue landing 1 foot and suppressing the entire main hall on the spot. What is this? What is this? 2 seconds later, the policemen and guards who rushed to the front to arrest Ryudo could not help but take a few steps back from the terrifying force. They staggered and fell to the ground. And the group of reporters who were holding their cameras behind them were even more shaken by this sudden kick. A large number of them fell to the ground, looking like wheat being harvested. The power of one foot was actually so fierce. Even if an elephant came and stomped with all its strength, it would not be as powerful. You guys. Seeing that the surrounding environment finally quieted down, Ryudo sneered and said, "What are you planning to do by jumping at me? Are you looking for death?" Right in the middle of the Kokyo main hall, surrounded by countless reporters, policemen, and guards, right in front of the royal family, who claimed to have the bloodline of God, Ryudo said the words "looking for death" without hesitation. It felt like he did not put a large group of people in his eyes, and his tone was like talking to a pile of unrecyclable garbage. This was no longer a question of arrogance. It was simply indescribable. Even Sensible, who graduated from a famous university, could not find a word to describe this young man in his vocabulary. But he could not help but slowly stand up from behind the long table and ask seriously, "Ryudo Kiryu, your sudden appearance this time is not purely to show off your strength, right?" There was no doubt that this young man had the strength of a national treasure. The bluestone floor that was shattered by his foot continued for several meters, which was enough to prove that his strength was comparable to the group of heroes in the mythological era. But Sensible could see that Ryudo had no malicious intent at this time. Otherwise, the place where the foot landed just now would not be the floor, but the heads of the royal family members. "About this, Sensible boss, let me explain about this matter." Just as Sensible, the police chief, stood up, the crowd not far away was suddenly broken from the middle. A cold woman in a dignified policewoman uniform with dozens of search section officers behind her walked to the long table with serious steps. Kawada-ya, the head of the search department, Tokushima and Hana, walked in front of the pale-faced queen in front of everyone and said in a cold tone, "The search department is now suspecting that you are related to an attempted murder case and would like to invite you back to assist in the investigation. You will cooperate, right?" Chapter 237. Crazy. Crazy, 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 crazy. For almost everyone present, they felt like they were crazy, or rather, they felt like they were dreaming. What's going on? What the hell is going on? Today's incident of the Queen being assassinated by a gang leader was already a big deal. However, during the press conference, the Queen threw out an even bigger piece of news. She was even preparing to launch a gang cleanup plan. Well, it wasn't a bad thing to have more explosive news. However, right after the extreme cleansing plan was announced, the legendary criminal, Tongsheng Ryudo, descended from the sky. Everyone present was so shocked that their scalps went numb. What was even more exaggerated was that after this, the dignified search section one chief Tokushima Linhua actually brought dozens of police officers to arrest the current Empress Kawada. And the crime was to suspect her of being related to an attempted murder case? The chief of the search section one planned to take the Empress back to the police station for investigation during the press conference. This felt like it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. Even for the reporters, who always wanted to see the world in chaos, this series of events was really too exaggerated. It was like waves after waves of monstrous waves crashing on their faces. There were also thousands of muscular men doing sit-ups crazily inside. When everyone's eyes were focused on Tokushima Kawada, the latter couldn't help but clench her teeth and said sternly, "Chief Tokushima, do you know what you are doing?" I know." Facing the Empress's obviously threatening tone, Tokushima replied calmly, bringing a vicious woman who even wanted to murder her own brother to justice. "It's very suitable for my job." W8. What? She? Could it be? The moment she heard Tokushima's words, the Empress Kawada's body suddenly trembled. Even at this critical juncture, Kawada's mind was still very clear. From Tokushima's attempted murder case, and even wanted to murder her own brother, Kawada finally thought of the most terrifying answer. But just when the Empress couldn't help but sweat a few drops from her forehead, the current Emperor Kawada, who sat next to her for a long time, finally slammed the table. "Pa!" This noble middle-aged man slammed the table and stood up, pointed at Tokushima's nose, and said angrily, You. What you are doing is disrespectful to our royal family. What do you? It had to be said that the Emperor of Japan's action of pointing at people's noses was really cute. Unfortunately, the following scene was really embarrassing. However, before the Sky Emperor could finish his words, he saw a pair of eyes filled with killing intent, as if they were demonic eyes that came from the depths of hell, staring at him. "Put your hand down, or I'll kill your whole family." Heavenly Emperor Wu Deku didn't need to have good eyesight to read the meaning in the eyes of Tokushima in Hana, the head of the search section 1. Gulp. The Emperor swallowed his saliva and felt cold sweat running down his back. Then, he retracted his hand in fear. What a joke! Who was Tokushima Linhua? On the surface, she looked like a high-level cadre of the Metropolitan Police Department, but in fact, she was one of the 4 main department heads under Tenma. The Security Department was the department responsible for the safety of the Tenma Group. There was no doubt that it was a real martial arts department, and, as the department head, Linhua was naturally a martial arts department of the martial arts department. It was no exaggeration to say that if she chose to attack in anger now, she could make the Emperor's head fall to the ground in 1 second, and make the royal family prepare to receive incense in 5 seconds. With such a ruthless person, it was no wonder that she could scare the Emperor to the point of peeing in his pants with just a glance. When the Emperor was so scared that he sat down, the police director Sensible also quickly came in front of his subordinate and asked seriously, "Chief Tokushima, what's going on?" "Boss Sensible, I have sufficient evidence to prove that Kawada is the mastermind of an attempted murder case." "Attempted murder case? Who did she attempt to murder?" "Me." Before Daigo Mingji could finish his sentence, a man wearing a familiar priest's attire slowly walked out from the crowd not far away. His neck was still stained with blood, and his eyes were filled with ferocity and hatred. It's really him. This. How is it possible?" Seeing this brother looking at his enemy, Kawada walked towards the speaker's table. Kawada felt her body go soft, and her mind was full of the word impossible. Not long ago, in Plum Garden, the scene of the fake priest's neck being cut open happened in front of Kawada Garden. She could clearly see the blood splattering everywhere, and then Ryudo hurriedly went over to support him. But from the way the fake priest appeared, this person seemed to be unscathed. As Kawada Garden stepped in the direction of his sister, the surrounding reporters also seemed to realize who this person was. "Wait, isn't this the Empress's brother, Kawada Garden?" "Yes. He is also the president of the Great Beauty Association. I interviewed him before, it can't be wrong." "How is it possible? Didn't they say that this person is already dead and was killed by Ryudo Kiryu?" Looking at the man who was declared dead not long ago appearing alive in the main hall, almost everyone was stunned. No one would have thought that this continuous drama would be completely ended by a magic card, Resurrection of the Dead. The moment Kawada Garden stood up, the Empress's previous accusations against Ryudo all became a joke. "You said that she went to Plum Garden to assassinate you, and your brother blocked the knife for you. But this person didn't die at all? You also said that the knife was stabbed by you. How can you explain this?" "Just in time. Today the police chief and the head of search division are here. I can fully cooperate with the work of the police department to prove that what I said is true. This woman did intend to murder me." In front of everyone present, Kawada Garden took out the piano wire-like knife from his collar and then handed it to Kyujimarinka. Because the police inspector Daigo Mingji was at the scene, there was nothing to say about what happened next. It was very simple. Originally, the police chief was very unhappy with Kawada Garden's actions and plan today. Since someone has already testified against her, then Sensible naturally won't let her go. With a wave of the police chief's hand, this unique press conference suddenly came to an end, and the initiator of all this, Kawada Garden, was also taken out by the police in a daze. Fortunately, because this press conference was relatively important, the reporters who came to participate only recorded the broadcast and didn't broadcast the whole process to the whole country through live broadcast. Otherwise, the royal family really didn't need to go out to meet people from today. At the same time, all the recorded videos, photos, etc. in the hands of all the reporters were also confiscated by the police department, and they were strictly required to never disclose what they saw today, otherwise they will be arrested for leaking state secrets. No matter what, today's incident was also a royal scandal. The entire upper class of Neon will do everything possible to prevent these things from being known by the civilians. Otherwise, I'm afraid that even the mascot of the royal family will be smashed to pieces in the future. I will also make the same request to you. Ryudo Kiryu. Today's matter is absolutely not allowed to be leaked, understand? Just after arranging his men to send away the reporters, Sensible came to Ryudo, who was chatting with Rinka, and said to the boy who brought him a huge surprise. Facing Goro's father, Ryudo also nodded and smiled. Don't worry, I'm not such a talkative person, but this matter is far from over. You don't have to be happy too early. Far from over? You mean, what else can the Empress do? Hearing this, Sensible couldn't help but frown. At least in the view of the police chief, the downfall of Kabato Tenya was inevitable. After all, the Empress had murdered her own brother and tried to frame Long Do with the crime of murder. She had colluded with a foreign company to launch a series of evil deeds. Moreover, it had been made public in front of so many people. There was no room for negotiation. Even if the past of the Empress was dug deeper, the problems that could be dug out would definitely be more than the above. It would not be difficult to send her to prison. Even if she took a million steps back, even the Empress had ways to rely on various relationships to smooth out so many troublesome things. But after these events, she didn't need to talk about standing on the front stage. In the future, the best ending for the Empress could only be half-house arrest in the Kokyo, becoming a bird in a cage. Therefore, Kabato Tenya was finished, and she absolutely could not have a chance to turn things around. However, although Sensible's inference was correct, it was only an inference from a normal point of view. In Ryudo's view, although Kabato Tenya had fallen on the surface, if she was not completely eliminated, this woman still had a lot of opportunities to make a comeback by relying on the American Godfather behind her. Kill her. She must not be allowed to leave alive. After cooperating with Sister Lin Hannah to record the testimony of this case, and when he drove back to the Rulong Group headquarters in the car sent by Colored Glaze, Ryudo thought so. It was not an easy task to kill Xiao Hetien, because this woman would have to stay in the police station for a long time. However, it was not necessarily an easy task to kill Kohishina, because this woman chose to escape from prison on the night she was arrested and interrogated in the police station. Yes, on the night when the princess coming-of-age ceremony was supposed to be held. Kabato Tenya escaped from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department with the help of several black-shirt men. Judging from the signs of her escape, this woman seemed to be prepared for this. Good escape. You're tuning in to the Echo Reads YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.